There's obviously a multitude of topics that we talk about when it comes to what may come to pass with the Burning Crusade Classic. And whilst nothing official has been announced yet, the waters have been stirred recently, obviously, with another survey that has gone out amongst some players in the community. So here we are again, blood is in the water, and we're talking about the Burning Crusade. But there's one topic in particular that really seems to get people buzzing, if you will, and that is the economy of the Burning Crusade. What will things look like in terms of our purses, our gold on hand, what we're going to be paying for items, and what are the players going to do if things were to either stay the way they are or move into some other kind of economy. And obviously there's a number of options that people have been floating that we will dive into during this call. But in order to get through all of this, I have recruited five amazing guests, I should say. And I want to quickly say hello to all of them now. And I'm so happy to have them here. Gargoyle, a returnee. Mate, how's things? It's been too long.
It's been going great right now. We cleared Nax week 1 and just on farm mode at the moment, just trying to keep up with everything. I appreciate you letting me come back on to share my opinions on the economy like this.
Happy to have you, mate. And we're also joined by another person from your part of the world, another returnee, Naismith. How's things, man? Good to have you.
Thanks for having me. Things are doing pretty good around here. It's a little loud in the background. Sorry about that.
That's all right, mate. It wouldn't be a pod with you without the kids. We love them. It's all good, man. And we've also got here yet another returnee. You guys know I love having these guests come back for more. It's really, really flattering to see people keep putting their hands up to come on the show. YOLO, mate, how are you?
I'm very good. I'm excited to be here again, staying up late in Europe and talking about some more TBC.
Again, thank you so much for staying up so late. And we've got another European on here with you, staying up very, very late and burning the midnight oil from Germany. Vivikus, how are you, man?
Thanks. I'm very fine. I'm playing my alts in the moment and not so much raiding. Coming from a different perspective, I guess.
All good. It's good to have you here, man. You're a first timer. We love getting people signing up for the first time as well. And finally, we have another returnee. Very, very happy to have this person, someone who's been quite active in the Discord as well. Zareta, mate, how's things?
Glad to be here, Josh. I'm enjoying my Christmas break from raiding and getting ready for another shot at Naxxramas next year.
Very good, very good. All right, guys, look, this one, I'm not going to lie, is going to be pretty intense. This can, to some people, be a very, very bone-dry topic. We're going to get pretty deep in the weeds with how nerdy we get on the economics. This is going to be one of the deepest of deep dives, if you want to say it that way. So whilst I appreciate that some of you may have their eyes glaze over with some of the stuff that we discuss, I have no doubt that many more of you will be salivating over the takes that you may hear over the next minimum 2 hours, and we will just see how long this goes. The time that we covered this on Countdown to Classic with just the one guest, Party Pooper, was on fire, and he went for 3.5 hours on his own. We've got 5 people here, so God only knows what's going to happen. But I look forward to it, and I'm going to unbridle these guests and let them run wild. So, guys, let me sort of kick things off. The economy is so important to so many players in World of Warcraft. Things like inflation, leveraging, deleveraging, commoditization are so real even in Azeroth. That's why we go so hard on these topics, because much like the callers on this call, so many of you listening at home will just have so much invested in this particular topic and invested in the game world. You know, we will be going through a bunch of stuff. And actually, I just remembered, I should point out a couple of these guests, you know, these aren't just necessarily your average WoW players. In real life, these are people that, you know, dabble in this stuff as well. Vivikus, I believe it was you who told me you've got, I hope it was Vivikus. I think I'm getting that right. You've got a master's degree in economics. Is that right?
Yes, it's economical engineering. It's a combination of engineering and economics.
Very good. Very, very cool, man. And, I know Naismith, even though you don't work in finance, you work in the legal field, much like myself, with the difference being that you're a good lawyer and I'm just a fucking shyster. But, we've got some big brains here, guys. Does anyone else out of interest happen to work with finance or economics in real life?
I'm a student at business economics at the end of my bachelor.
Very good. Very, very cool.
Yeah, and I have a master's degree in macroeconomics.
Oh, another one. Fantastic. All right, guys. Well, look, with all that in mind, let's get into it.
So keeping all of these economic principles in mind that we're going to be touching on over the next couple of hours, there's obviously three big scenarios that people are talking about in terms of what might happen with TBC. And the first being TBC progression with no gold cap, that being servers just continuing on as they are into the expansion, with everyone being able to take everything as you would with any other MMO, and just life goes on as normal. The second situation is that you have that same progression, except you instill some form of gold cap. You stop people and say, please empty your pockets except for all of, I don't know, arbitrary figure of 5,000 gold, and then continue on through the gate. The third scenario is obviously that of a fresh economy that would come with a new server, a complete economic reset, which would have everyone starting from scratch, and obviously starting from level 1 or level 58 or whatever it might be. Regardless of how likely you deem any one of those three scenarios, we're still going to be discussing them. I just think it's worth at least scratching the itch on all three of those prospective possibilities. And look, there might be other possibilities out there. I just think those are the three big ones. And we'll get to all of that through the course of this chat. So question number one, guys, is more money, more problems. True or false? Having a high amount of liquid cash circulating in an MMORPG economy is a good thing overall, as it makes building a small fortune easier for everyone. Open to the floor, first in, best dressed. Is it better to have more cash going around?
Yes, I'll say that with some conditions. The biggest condition I would say is that as long as the gold is not concentrated and held by a very small minority of the population.
I mean, you don't want to have so much gold in the economy that the currency itself holds no longer much value compared to other currencies. But at the same time, you don't want to have so few that people are not incentivized to use it in order to buy stuff. So you need to have enough in order to have a healthy trade, but at the same time without full devaluation of the currency, as we see, for example, in Diablo 2, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's a good point with Diablo 2. Yeah. That it kind of like some money helps, but you get to a point where it's like a steep drop off in utility for the game, the amount of money. And yeah, Diablo 2, I guess, is a great example. Diablo 3 as well, right? Where gold has no value at all. And to a certain degree, retail as well, right?
But in the end, I think the gold itself is not so important if it's much or less for the trading, because everything will be more expensive or less expensive. But for the casual players, it's interesting to have more gold because they can achieve the money things which are in the game. Like buying a mount or an epic mount, they can achieve this easier. And only on this side, it's having an effect for them. And I think this is interesting for the casual players. So they don't mind having more money in the game.
Yeah, but I think some people would think that is a bad idea, right? Or a bad thing, that everyone can get an epic mount, for instance. Let's say, like, make a crazy proposal, right? And say that one Primal fire will cost you 8,000 gold because the economy is so inflated. Then everyone will be able to get a flying mount. And I think some people will get turned off by that and thinking like, oh, I want it to be a status symbol that I have a flying mount. So I don't want it to be easy. And then I don't want anyone to like be able to access money that fast.
So you're talking about how you don't want, you're worried about people like certain items that cost a lot of money losing status symbols if there's too much
I
money.
am not worried about that, but I am 100% sure that some people see it that way, right? I mean, it's kind of the same with gear, right? If it's attainable by everyone, then it's not really a special thing to have. And I think a lot of players are thinking that stuff like an epic mount should be a special thing to have.
It's also a bit of a balancing act in the sense that as you get more and more gold into the economy, things like specific item farms become more and more potent. And so then you get people moving away from certain farms and concentrating. Like, for example, the Primal Fire being 8,000 gold means that even if you just get 1 or 2 motes an hour, it's more gold per hour than anything else. So people concentrate and it becomes like this really toxic, like de-evolution straight into just tagging as fast as you can and getting mad when you can't get any.
I think it's not much in that case, the fact that a Primal Fire costs 1,000 gold, but what the relative price of Primal Fire is compared to other mats. And I think that this is a good problem to point out because it was probably one of the most important problems in classic economy. That is, there were some mats which were so much more expensive than other ones. And probably this divide did more in terms of harming the gameplay experience than the actual absolute numbers, which are fully relative.
Yeah, but only for items that didn't scale with the number of players. So everything you could get out of an instance, for example, would scale with the amount of players. Everything you can get out of crafting would scale with the number of players. So it was only the few parts like Black Lotus or Devil Saw or something like this, which did not scale with the number of players on the servers. And these were really going up with the pricing. But everything else, I mean, remember Righteous Orbs or something like this, even so it was spotting most of the time, but everything you can get out of instances will scale with this number. So it will not be like limited or something.
Yes, that is one of the main causes of inflation, but at the same time, we have seen a few items like, for example, arcane crystals and arcanite bars, which even with instant sources, they still saw a steady growth in value over the months because the demand was so high that even with instances, the offer was not enough to actually lower the prices. But yeah, you are right in the sense that the hard cap can be a main cause of inflation, and it was, especially in vanilla.
I gotta disagree on arcane crystals. Those things had no value from about phase 3 to phase 5 on my server. They were going for as little as 25 to 30 gold, when in almost any other phase they were like 70 to 100 a piece. Like those things, like, and for a lot of that, it was because stuff like the Lionheart helm, most people had already crafted theirs, and they only gained value again in phase 6 when we needed them for like tier 3 stuff.
I'm actually experiencing the almost opposite on my server, where arcane crystals held really steady at about 50 to 60 gold all the way until phase 6. Now they've plummeted all the way down to 23 gold on my server. So like they've dropped half the value. Dreamfoil, which can be farmed in an instance, is still hovering at about a gold 25, which is kind of to be expected because of all the new consumables that you need to get that require Dreamfoil. But then other byproducts from that Dreamfoil farm, like Grom's Blood's cut in half. But then you look at one of the herbs that can't be farmed out of an instance that's used for quite a few mats, such as Plague Bloom, has over doubled in price on Peggle.
Exactly. This is exactly what you can see everywhere, because it cannot grow with the number of players, and you can actually stop people from getting it by farming these areas very strongly. But everything in the instance, you cannot stop anybody to go into an instance. So you will never secure this market. And so in the end, the price can be 2 gold, 10 gold, 50 gold. Everybody can get it. So you can also profit from this high price, or have no problem with the low price.
I'm seeing the same as Gargoyle on my server, and I talked to some guys about it actually yesterday, And what I think has happened is that a lot of the butters have now moved into the diamond farms, for instance, and are now doing the herbing and mining farm runs. And then they are flooding the economy with mats. And even though they then fall in price, I think the quantity that they are selling at the moment is a lot higher than when they were selling them in phase 3 and 4 and 5. So I think in those phases, people thought, okay, or the butters thought, we might as well just do some mage boosting. That's what is going to get us the most profit. But I think perhaps now it has moved a bit into some of the other mat farming runs. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. And in that way, actually, the demand is rising for many of these items right now, but the price is falling because the market is being flooded by butters. And that would actually hurt a lot of the casual players, because if you're a casual player who is trying to farm diamond, for instance, you will now see that the items that you're farming is worth less than it was 3 months ago, but perhaps you're selling it a bit faster.
I think that's where the actual knowledge base of of the general players is kind of hurting a lot of the gold farms. You'll see a YouTube video. It's like, hey, get 70 gold an hour doing this farm. Well, 200 people will start doing that, and that'll kill the value of anything that they're farming.
Yeah, that's kind of been something that's happened as well, is like at the very release of Naxxramas, Greater Shadow Protection potions skyrocketed in price, so Grave Moss and Fade Leaf also shot up. But then people realized, well, you can farm 5 Greater Shadows an hour out of Scarlet Monastery just by running Graveyard, Library, and Armory. And you go there now and you just see people running back and forth between all of them, and they've dropped back to their pre-Phase 6 price again. And so it's one of these things where the knowledge of the player kind of works against some of these trends, where it's like if too many people know about a specific farm, it'll immediately crash the price back down.
I mean, one of the problems of discussing economy is that unlike other topics that we discussed even in this podcast, such as classes, for example, economy more than anything else depends on the behavior of other people. So it can vary a lot between servers. For example, I've heard of a lot of servers where the price of major mana potions completely collapsed because of a lot of hunters were doing Dharma Tribute solo runs, and so they were flooding the market with these potions. Well, to be honest, I have never seen any sort of significant price drop on my server, because there really weren't a significant number of hunters doing this on my server, so the price stayed high. Whereas at the same time, for example, Black Lotus, even right before the hotfix, on my server, it was at around 150 gold, but I heard that on some servers it was almost 300 gold or something like that. So it depends a lot on what kind of server you are playing it, and even a few players performing certain actions can have a huge impact on the economy. So when one of the problems we had even with Naismith, I remember on Discord, is that if our server experiences are very different, you end up having very different perspectives on the economy subject as a whole, because the experience is completely different.
All right, guys, I'm loving this already. We're about 2% of the way through this chat, and you guys are on fire. You've come out of the blocks absolutely just in fine form. So thank you so much for that. We'll get to the second question. Question number 2, once again, true or false, as it will be for all of these questions but one. Utilizing a gold cap is useless, as it only is a slight speed bump in the tidal wave of inflation that is coming. People will simply hoard items as a bypass. True or false, first in, best dressed?
True, 100% true, I think.
Mostly.
And I have
100% agree.
I have a lot to say about this one, so I thought let me rush in and say something. I once heard a woman say that you should never, that was in raising children, but I think you can say it here as well, that you should never impose rules that you cannot enforce. And I think if Blizzard were to impose a gold cap, they will not be able to enforce it. Some people will be smart, and some people are already thinking about this, right? Trying to fool the system so that if there is a gold cap, they have 10 different strategies in how to get around the gold cap. And I think if you do that, then it's like a bit like tax havens. So the ultra wealthy, they are going to find loopholes and they will stay wealthy. And the people that it's hitting are like the common folks. And I think if they do a gold cap, the try-hard people, they will find loopholes. They will invest into jewel crafting mats, which you have already seen 20 guides on YouTube on in how to do. They will make professionals that already is like been talked about as well, right? Making spellcloth and so on for TBC. So people are already talking about if there is a gold cap, how can we circumvent that? And I think it will be so hard to do it. And the people that are going to get hit will be the casual gamer, because if a tryhard, like for instance me, if we say that I can only bring 500 gold or something, I'm going to be playing 20 hours a day for the first week or something. So after 2 or 3 days, I'll be level 70, I'll clear the tier 4 content, and then I will have 4 days of non-stop farming where I'm perhaps a bit ahead of the curve, and I can use some good farming spots before they get crowded, and I'll be up to my 5, 6, 7k gold again. But the casual guy who plays for 4 or 5 hours a week, he will be struggling for months to recover what he perhaps have made in Classic. So I think it will hit the poor and common people and not hit the tryhards, which, I mean, were the ones that you would expect to hit with a gold cap.
Not to mention that if they only do a gold cap without any other conditions, people can still carry a lot of gold, and I mean really in the thousands, just by using vendor items. For example, there is a ring called the Rock that you can sell to a vendor for 25 gold. Just imagine how much gold you can accumulate just by hoarding these rings in your on your charters. I mean, even if it's just like, imagine having 100 of these rings on each of your charters, that's like 2,500 gold per charter. So making it so that people can't get their fly mounts on like week 1 is basically impossible. And past that, I think that Wille was right in the sense that the main divide between the rich and the poor won't be liquid gold per se, but the ability of generating it. So, for example, having alts with professions, having a fly mount, which everybody will have one way or the other. So it won't really help as much as some people hope without other further conditions.
A simple gold cap without any conditions to it is useless. It's completely useless for the exact same reasons these guys have gone over. However, like the idea of having people with, I don't know if you guys saw the post on one of the subreddits that Gressel just went for 198,000 gold on a GDKP run. The idea that we have people that could go into a expansion and at the start, like just start taking acting things like the Blessings deck, which is all just a bunch of like it's a collectible deck that you get for Dark Moon Fair. The fact that you could like take something like that and just use them as commodities rather than actually using them is a little annoying to someone like me, for someone that's just going to treat it as an investment. But I mean, that some people are going to play the game that way, so I would think a gold cap with certain good, except like with conditions, would be a good thing to prevent something like that.
To be fair, the Dark Moon decks will probably not come out until Black Temple phase, because that's how it was back then. So the only really pricey items that will be coveted early on will be like primals and other stuff that you can actually farm. I mean, there are not really many ultra rare items like imaging a recipe for Lionheart Helm or Edgemaster Handguards or stuff like that will basically be completely monopolized by the rich. That's one of the main big differences between TBC Economy and Classic, but we probably have more time to discuss it later.
that's a pretty big conclusion that we can't really draw, since, I mean, Blizzard hasn't even announced that TBC Classic is a thing yet.
Yeah, I'm just assuming in case they follow the same logic they did with Classic, but of course we can't know for sure until they did it. But with Dark Moon Fair, for example, they didn't start dropping cards until I think Phase 3.
Okay, but I think to come back to the issue of the gold cap, I mean, didn't Blizzard already try this with the transfers? They gold cap the transfers. So people transfer with 150 Black Lotus or something like this. And so the gold cap is already done on this side. And on the other side, it's again the question of how do you want to treat different kind of players? I mean, on the one side, you have the people who raid a lot and have really good gear. And this is the game they play. And for me, for example, I like to do alts and I like to farm and to do economy. And it would be not a fair trade in this case. The one side, the T3 is for free. You can take it over. And the other playstyle not. I mean, for me, it's not so bad because I have the alts and I can do the professions. And this is okay, I guess. But if you think about this in this way, it's not a fair treatment of all of them. So the achievement of getting T3 is something, yes, that is how the game is supposed to be played, and you can take it over to the next step. But the, let's say, 100,000 gold you have achieved, you are not allowed to take with you. And this will be a big hit to a lot of players, I guess. Even so, I'm with you that most casuals won't really have a big issue, because most people I know of the casual people where I'm mostly at, most of them don't have more than 1,000, 2,000 gold. So this will be underneath the threshold anyhow, and so they don't care.
Yeah, and I was going to kind of bring up that exact point that Vivek has just brought up, in that like people play the game differently. Some people want to be those hardcore raiders. Some people want to, level 1 of every class to 60. Some people play the auction house, and that's their entire game. They literally log on and just have fun playing the market. But at the same time, it's like whatever arbitrary line they draw in the sand for a gold cap, you'll have people, even regular people, who maybe worked hard to prep up, say, 15,000 gold for the 3 characters they plan on playing as like their quote unquote mains in TBC. And now they can only bring 2,000 gold a character. That's like just going to hit people who invested a lot of time and hard work into something that they like really take pride in. And to have like those arbitrary lines of like, well, we're going to let you be rewarded for one type of gameplay, such as raiding or having multiple characters, but we're not going to reward you for playing the auction house or farming a bunch of gold.
Except look at it this way, that raiding gear that you've worked so hard for is going to be useless in what? Like 3 weeks?
It kind of depends. Like, yeah, it depends on the class, depends on the character, depends on what drops you see, right? Because you could maybe be running a couple tier 3 items well into tier 5 just because you don't see the tier 4 replacements, right? So like essentially resetting people to say back to molten core level gear just to guarantee that you'll replace everything in a pre-biz setup. It's just like, again, it's not a fair treatment for the different play styles of the game. And that's kind of like, I think, the biggest problem I had with it.
I think there is one difference though, but I totally agree that people play differently and you transfer your power in different ways. But the thing that is with the gold, in my opinion, is that that kind of power has the power to influence other people's playstyle a lot, and other people's enjoyment of the game. I mean, if you have 100,000 gold and you transfer to a server, you will be able to monopolize a market, and you will be able to affect many thousands of players with your actions. That won't be the same case if you have like a full tier 3 rogue or something. Yes, you can run around and gank, but you won't be able to have this huge impact on the server in the same way that you have with the gold.
Yeah, that is true. But you have to think on one other aspect. Many people forget. Everybody talks about pay to win is stupid, buying gold is stupid. But a gold cap is for pay to win a perfect thing. If I have enough money, I just make enough accounts for the transfer, move the money to all of these accounts, have 1 month of them, and move them all back. If TBC is for free, it's not much cost. So actually you can then move more money by paying cash. And this is nothing else, just like buying gold. So again, there's so many loopholes, so many problems with the gold cap. I don't see any chance of really affecting the situation, because the guy with 100,000 K, he will get the money over there. I'm with, I don't remember who said this, but I'm totally with there. The rich guy finds the loophole. The normal player will lose.
But I also think, like we talked about the blessings deck, and the last server I played on, just to give like a perspective, people were paying 5,000 gold for like not even the aces of the deck, just regular cards, because some people had the amount of gold and they were willing to get the deck in the first week of the Dark Moon Fair. And I agree that it probably won't be at launch, but people will save up for when it comes out. But imagine something like the Mongoose prize. The guy who gets Mongoose in the first reset of Karazhan, he's going to be so filthy rich on his server. I mean, you can't even, just charge 2,000 gold for a Mongoose enchant, and there will be people lining up for it. I'm 100% sure, because people will have so much gold.
Let's take Mongoose, for example. It's true that there won't be a lot of people who have Mongoose week 1, but it won't be like Lionheart, for example. On my server, there have been like only one person who could craft Lionheart Helm for like 2 months on my faction. With Mongoose, even first week, statistically, assuming that every Karazhan raid has an enchanter, which is very likely considering enchanting is one of the few professions in TBC which actually gives you an intrinsic advantage in terms of stats. So a lot of people will have enchanting. And if every Karazhan raid has an enchanter, then even if there are, for example, 100 Karazhan raid in the first week, then you will have like 5-10 people who have Mongoose. So your ability to actually control the market and demand outrageous prices will be greatly diminished compared to what we have seen in Classic. That is one of the main points I've tried to make before, that when we talk about controlling the market, we must not forget that in order to be able to control the market, you need two things. First, you need to have the money to actually be able to buy the entire supply. But at the same time, the supply must have certain characteristics of rarity and capping, so that people can't just flood the market with that mat. For example, you can control the market for extremely rare epics like Edgemaster Handguard, or you can control the market for hard-capped mats like Devil Soul Leather or Black Lotus. But for example, you can't really control a market like Cleft-Tooth Leather or even Primal Fire, because they are not really common, but they are common enough that even a random person can go into, Shadow Moon Valley in the case of Primal Fire, find a few spawn points and just get those modes and then go on the auction house and undercut the hell out of you. So all your market control will come at a loss in the long run, because there is just too many people who can acquire that resource in the outer world, go on the auction house and make you go for a loss. The only rare items, as you mentioned, are the Dark Moon cards that I can think of, but those probably won't come until Black Temple patch, and by then, even with a fresh economy, I assure you that we'll see a lot of inflation.
Blink Strike.
Blade of Sorcery and Blink Strike are both extremely valuable things.
Excuse me, which one? Sorry?
Blade of Sorcery and...
It's called Blade of Wizardry, isn't it?
Wizardry. I couldn't remember. And Blink Strike. Those are going to be very valuable. I don't know if they're going to be Edge Masters, but they're pretty similar. A lot of rogues who really want Blink Strike.
Edge Masters is a bit for the full expansion, whereas Blade of Wizardry is outclassed as early as tier 4. So I would.
But that's a lot of. That's a lot of theory crafting on the Wizardry.
We'll move on. We've gone a bit off topic on that one, and trust me, we've got so many questions to get through that we might have to do a part 2. I'm loving the chat though. If it gets tangential, I don't mind. Question number 3, guys. True or false?
The TBC economy takes somewhat of a turn in regards to farmable materials due to the lack of a golden goose. With no extremely valuable items obtained from fixed nodes such as Black Lotus and Arcane Crystals, the playing field is leveled and in turn will decrease the effect that bots have on the economy. True or false?
True. Mostly true, I'd say. Because there are some mats which are a bit rare, for example, Mana Thistle, Nightmare Vine, and certain other herbs. But the critical point here is, first of all, the respawn timers. Even the most rare mat in TBC, aside from some epic BOE or Dark Moon card, respawns in no more than 5-10 minutes. The normal respawn timer of anything. There is nothing like Black Lotus or Devil Source with a particularly long respawn timer, and this is key because a 5-minute respawn timer is something that a bot, for example, can't reasonably control in normal conditions, whereas when you have few spawn points with particularly long timers, this completely changes the dynamics and allow for a much easier control.
I think the effect of bots will be they will be producing goods and also raw gold, but not using any of the material, not consuming anything. And this will always have an influence on the market, reducing prices on certain items and making them more available to people, actually. But I think the chance to have a monopole or to raise prices artificially will be much less. So I agree, it's true. It's less effect for all the people, which is seen directly, but indirectly, the bots actually make the prices cheaper because they only produce and don't consume.
But they will also produce a lot of gold that will lead to inflation. So. But I totally agree. In Classic, or in Vanilla, you can farm a lot of good items in dungeons, and the bots can be in there and do their thing, like Righteous Orbs, but also the set timers for Black Lotus and so on. But I don't think bots will be able to farm, for instance, on the Elemental Plateau, to farm Primal Fires and so on, because people will be PvPing there, and it will be a highly contested area, and I don't think you'll be able to have a bot up there that can control the area. And also, I mean, if you see a guy with 5 multi-boxing bots or something up there, then you're going to have a ton of people reporting him instantly. Yeah. So it's right now it's a lot easier for botters to hide in instances and log on for 2 seconds to pick an herb and then log out again. But in Classic or in TBC, you have to be online for a lot longer, and you have to be in the open world. So I think botting in the open world will be hard, but I mean, you will still see groups doing botting groups doing Stratholme, for instance, just to farm cloth and vendor all of the gray and white items that they are getting, and will be supplying tons of gold. But I don't think, like Serrator said, they will not be owning markets in the same way that they're doing right now.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that TBC in many ways we have an opposite dynamic of prices compared to Classic. In Classic, the main drive of inflation in terms of goods were the consumables, and we have seen an increasing trend across Classic lifetime, because the more you go through tiers, the more consumables you need. On the other hand, in TBC, the bulk of gold goes into craftables rather than consumables. So we'll see a huge spike early on, but a stark and steady reduction over time. So in the long run, in TBC, we won't see many of the dynamics we are used to in Classic in terms of prices and inflation.
I would actually disagree with that. We will see a huge cost in terms of craftables, like right at the start, and usually at the beginning of every tier, because there's new stuff to craft, like Boots of Blasting or like the Lionheart swords. But there is like the cost of consumables is going to stay pretty much steady, and it might even grow, I would say, as people are using more and more, because you're wiping more in tier 5 than in tier 4. That's just going to be like food.
Let's use that as a segue, maybe, because that's one of my following questions. But just before I get into that segue, just the first part of what I said, am I right or wrong in saying that there is that, if you refer to it as the golden goose of TBC, when we think of things like Black Lotus and Arcane Crystals? You know, I know everyone wants to say the primals, but we've also talked about how much of a shit fight farming primals is going to be. So is there one item that maybe outside of primals, everyone is going to be absolutely killing each other to get their hands on?
Primal
I would say Mark of Sageris, for instance. I mean, the rep items for Scryer and Aldor can be farmed in some places, and I think there will be a lot of competition for farming those spots as well. Like in Shadow Moon Valley, at the Black Temple, you can AoE farm a lot of Mark of Sageris to get rep for Aldor, and almost every class, except for casters, will want to be exalted with the Aldor, and that's a bit of questing, but a huge part of getting exalted is to turn in these hand-ins, and you will most likely buy a lot of them from the auction house, and that will be a place where people will farm a lot.
But that's only the demand which is high there. It's not the golden goose. I think there's no golden goose like it was in Classic. It's just there are certain items which are very, very sought after, especially in the beginning, to achieve certain gates in the game. But that's normal. That's market, how it's working. But I think important is there's nothing which will be the thing all over the time.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, if we're golden goose, you simply mean stuff that costs a lot. There will be a few items that cost a lot. I'm thinking, for example, of Primal Might. But the big difference is that you won't have items like Black Lotus that cost a lot, and you have no other means of acquiring them than accepting whatever price the auction house places. Because even something like Primal Might, it might cost as much as Black Lotus, especially early on. But unlike Black Lotus, it's something that you can make for yourself if you have an alchemist or you have a friend alchemist who's willing to give you a cooldown. Whereas with Black Lotus, for most players, the only way of acquiring one is buying it on the auction house.
I would actually expect that Primal Might's going to be much, much more expensive than Black Lotus at first. Because I talked about this with Zerator. Like, if you have a 5,000 person server and just like 10% of them are mages and warlocks, Jesus Christ, kids. Sorry.
It's okay.
Like, every single one of them is going to need at minimum 10 Primal Mights to craft their Spellstrike gear. That is a lot of money that you are going to be dumping into that. And that's a lot of people wanting them immediately. It's going to be a huge cost. Transmutes are going to be prized. They're probably not going to go outside guilds much. That would be my expectation. But that's like, Zerator is right. If you have an alchemy alt, you could, it's really good for you, and it's also a great way to make some money.
I totally agree, Naismith. The Primal Mites will be insanely expensive. On fresh servers, I have sold cooldowns for 100 gold, and that's on fresh servers where people had no money in the beginning, right? So I'm guessing they could go for 1,000 gold for the finished product, and you can sell a cooldown for upwards of like 400 or 500 gold. I don't think you will have a hard time doing that. And I agree with Zerator. There isn't any item that is gated, but there are some items that you will be able to farm and you will make money from the entire expansion.
All right, Naismith, I'll throw it to you for the next question, because you started to touch on it in one of your answers just then regarding consumables, as 1,000 dad gamers listening feel your pain with dealing with the family in the background. And mate, the question is this. True or false, the operating cost of raiding in TBC is heavily decreased due to the implementation of Guardian and Battle Elixirs. True or false, mate? You started to touch on it.
Yeah. You can't have to, you can only have 1 flask or 2 elixirs, and they have to be like the right type of elixirs. Granted, that's dependent on the patch we get, because if we're in genuine 2.01, then like you saw people with flasks and elixirs everywhere, but that was nerfed pretty quickly. So let's hope that happens. But the flasks don't cost as much in TBC in my experience. However, everyone, and I mean everyone, is expected to have one, which is a slight difference for me in Classic, because I'm a tank now, but so I have flask fortification, but we had lots of melee that did not run a flask at all. So there will be more people using them, and at least that's what I think is going to happen.
I would like to add another thing, that in TBC there are also a few token items, for example, Mark of the Illidari, which allows you to buy a flask which only work in tier 5 and tier 6 content. And if I remember correctly, rates drop quite a bit of those, at least enough for a guild to cover like a good 50% of their flask expenses in these raids. Furthermore, in tier 5 raids, you can use certain special potions instead of super mana potions and super health potions that you can buy with dungeon tokens, or they can drop from enemies in the case of Tempest Keep. And these ones too will help a bit with consumables. Not as much as the Guardian Battle Elixir Divide, but it's still something worth mentioning, I think.
I was going to say, the Mark of the Illidari, though, is dependent on people getting exalted with 3 different factions. And I don't know about you, but I don't trust like non-sweaty people to get like exalted with all 3, especially when probably 2 of them don't offer you any material benefit in terms of gear.
Yeah, it's Lower City and Shaitar, right? And then either Eldor or Scryer, if I'm correct, right? Isn't it?
I think that's what it is.
Yeah, but I mean, like Lower City, you will get by farming heroics. So at some point you will get it, right? And I think the same with Shaitar in Tempest Keep dungeon.
If you farm them enough, yeah. But
yeah, of course. But I think a lot of people will do that to get their badge of justice.
Probably.
So, but yeah, I mean, it won't be 100% of players. And in all of the guilds I've been in, I've always been able to get as many Mark of Illidari that I wanted, because we were like only half of the guild that were able to use them.
Yeah, that was my experience.
So I think what Sarator was saying is like it will cover half of the guild's needs. I think that's pretty accurate.
I mean, effectively, all you need in order to use Mark of the Illidari is to have at least some people in your raid who have the reputation. You don't need everyone in your raid. I mean, those people who don't have the reputation will use normal flasks, but the ones who do have the reputation can use those marks. And aside from Keepers of Time, for most other EREC dungeon reputations, there is generally at least one dungeon for each hub, which is popular enough to be able to be farmed without much hassle. I mean, you have Hellfire Ramparts, which is pretty popular. You have Underbog and Slave Pens, especially, which is very popular. Setek Holzer, not much for the items, but for a lot of mining and herb nodes, as well as the Epic Flight quest for druids, and Mechanar and Botanica for Tempest Keep are also quite popular among pugs.
Wait, you have people that actually farm Botanica?
It's the worst dungeon in the game.
I mean, it's the dungeon with the highest amount of badges of justice, so it's not the easiest one, but the fact that you can get 5 badges just from that dungeon, and it also has a few interesting items, means that you will probably still find it's not Slave Pens, but it's also not Shattered Halls or Arcatrats, you know.
I saw people farming Mechanar constantly, but Botanica never. Yeah. Like that was on like 3 of the private servers I played on. Like Botanica is a ghost town.
Yeah, if you don't have a paladin tank, it's a hell. But yeah, that's another.
We'll move to the next one. Gargoyle, I'm going to throw this to you, mate. And the question is this, one that we've already touched on a little bit, but a spicy one, maybe an easy answer though. True or false, gold caps stop people getting their flying mounts in week 1?
I would say false, 100%. If somebody's dedicated to getting their flying mount week 1, they will, like the other guys have touched on already, have like vendor items banked well ahead of time to be able to boost their gold stack from whatever the gold cap is to the 5,000, 6,000 you need to get flying and epic flying.
Guys, this might be an easy, quick answer. Is it just like Gargoyle said, nothing's going to stop the sweaties?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just the quest, just the Outland quest alone give you something like, I think, 3,000 golds at level 70. And most sweethearts will try to get to level 70 with as few quests done as possible in order to max out their reputations more easily and get more gold. So yeah, most people will get those 5,000 gold easily week 1.
Yeah, and then those people who are doing, dungeon farm methods to level to save all those quests for the week 1, grind for gold, will also get a bunch of gold and supplies out of those dungeons that they can then just immediately throw in the auction house. We talk about how people will be prepping up to level professions right away. So things like all the cloth for all the tailors that are going to be looking to get, Spell Strike and Shadow Weave and whatever else they need are going to need that cloth to max out their tailoring.
The only exception I can think of is if we actually start on a fully fresh server where everyone starts from like level 1. But even then, if it is not 1 week, in 2 weeks, surely we'll see flying mounts from the tryhard.
Yeah.
I think flying mount is even the easier one. We will even see some epic mounts very soon.
Yeah, I mean the epic one, not the normal one.
Yeah, no, sorry, that's what I was referring to, the epic one. Sorry, my bad. All right, guys, let's move on to the next one. That was an easy one. I was just testing you. True or false? Those who get their flying mounts first will dominate their server's economy. True or false?
I'd say it depends.
Yeah, that's a depends.
Yeah, that's a huge depends. I agree.
If it's just a very few people, yes, for a small time, but it takes very few people with flying mounts to like saturate the entire map, at which point diminishing returns start getting very quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually say false.
Yeah, me too.
Just because of what Zerator said. I mean, if you are cloud farming, for instance, or mining in Hellfire, which are two of the very good farms within the Epic Flyer, if you are 4 guys doing it, then the market is very saturated. I mean, I know people who would only do it if they were 1 or 2 people doing it, and I think we will have almost everyone, like we talked about, or at least a good percentage of players will have epic flying very fast. So I think the time, the window where you are alone will be very short, but in the window where you're alone, you'll be able to make a lot of gold. And I think that's especially, I mean, if it's 100% fresh, then of course the window will be longer. But it takes only a handful of players to ruin it for each other.
And also the flying mount is not always an advantage. I mean, if there are enough people on the ground, you will not have any advantage of having the flying mount. It's only for certain areas, and they are really small in the Outlands. So I think the effect, as they said, as soon as there are 3, 4, 5 people in this area, it's not different than any other area where the people are on the ground already. So I think the major issue there will be so many people on such a small space in Outlands. So moving quickly is not such an advantage as it was in Classic.
Having the Epic Flyer can actually help you with some really non-traditional farms, especially early on. The one I'm thinking of is the Ethereum Jailer farm. I don't know if this happened on your server, but because reputation is such a premium, if you farm these Ethereum Jailers, you get these keys. And every time you unlock a jail cell, you have a chance of getting 75 rep with a random faction. So what people would do is they would farm those and then sell, like, hey, I'm going to open 100 cells for 600 gold per person, so they can get 2,400 gold just from the people that join. And like being able to farm these jailers spawn at set points, and but they're all across a very diverse map, like Netherstorm. So being able to do something like that actually can make you a good bit of gold, but that's not enough to dominate a market.
I will like to add that we need to distinguish between epic flight mounts and swift flight forms for druids, because swift flight forms actually allow you to do some things that really help farming that you can't really do with epic flight mounts. I mean, two things especially. The first one, that which most people know, is that you can loot herbs without dropping your epic flight form, but you must drop from your epic flight mount in order to loot a herb. But most importantly, early on, if you are fighting a person on the ground for spawns, think for example fire elementals, having an epic fly mount doesn't really help as much as you might think, because you still have to spend 3 seconds every time in order to mount up. But a druid with a epic swift flight form can chain pulls in a way no other person can, especially if they abuse Moonfire and stuff like that. So if I were a druid and I can get a swift flight form fast, I will try to abuse it, not much for herbs and stuff like that, but to try and farm, for example, cleft tooth leather and stuff like that much faster than anybody else can in the beginning, just by being able to jump from a spawn point to the other swiftly and efficiently.
All right, guys, I'll go to the next question. Zoraida, I'll just get you to just watch your mic one more time, man. All good, man. And we'll go to this one. Dailies are the money factories that will save the casual player from inflation. True or false?
False. Definitely false.
Okay, get into it.
Depends on the server.
I mean, in the long run, it is always false. It doesn't really matter what server it is, and I'll try to explain why. This doesn't just apply to dailies, but to any kind of raw gold farm that anybody can do. The thing is, if a raw gold farm is efficient for the economy at a certain point, more and more people will do that kind of farm. And the more people who farm raw gold, the more the inflation increases, because more gold enters the economy. Whereas any other kind of farm, for example, herb farm or ore farm, has no effect on the inflation and actually tends to slightly decrease the inflation because of auction house cuts. Unfortunately, daily farming is something that anybody can do and anybody will do because of reputation and other rewards, irrespectively of the market advantage. So there will never be, in the long run, efficient ways of farming gold. At most, they might cover your repair costs, your spec costs, but they will never allow you to buy consumables comfortably as much as people who farm other stuff. Because unlike, for example, Diamond Tribute farming, which is a raw gold farming, but one which not everybody can do, dailies will be the baseline basically for everybody in the server, and so they will be necessarily inefficient in the long run.
Yeah, I kind of agree.
I completely agree. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that the real world will play out is just as you say. I think you can cover your raiding costs by doing dailies, but I also think I've seen people talk about these dailies and say, I'll just do dailies to get my flying mount and so on. And you can definitely do that. But please remember that the dailies are not released until Isle of Quel'Than has. Of course, there are other dailies, but I would never do those as a gold farm. I would only do the dailies at the Isle of Quel'Than for gold. And that's in the last phase, probably, of the game. But once it's out, I would say that you can cover your gold needs by doing those.
There's never been a server I've been on where if you do dailies diligently that you can't afford your raid consumables easily. Because like the idea that everyone does the dailies is not true. Like the amount of times you'll hear in raid, oh God, can you spare me some gold? I didn't do my dailies yet today. You'll hear that every time you raid.
I mean, it depends a lot also on the dynamics on the server, and you're right that, of course, if you do enough dailies, necessarily you can afford consumables at a certain point. I remember on a server that I did dailies with like 4 charters, and of course at that point you can afford consumables. What I wanted to say is that it will never be a safe or efficient way. And of course, how efficient or how inefficient depends on your server, but I wouldn't rely on it. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't expect for sure to be able to afford my consumables just with dailies. It's not a safe way of affording your consumables because it depends on your server dynamics. Whereas, for example, if you have a good resource farming method or dynamic, it doesn't really depend on what other people do. You can always afford what you need.
I think the dailies, they come later. So at this point, it's perhaps not so much of interest, but in the beginning, raw gold farms will be interesting because, as you said rightly, there are ways how gold comes into the game, which is usually being done by the quests and by raw gold farms and selling to the vendor. And there's a lot of money sinks, especially in the beginning of the game. Everybody buying their flight mount, everybody buying epic flight mounts, all the specking in the beginning, and so on. There will be trainers and auction fees and what all is there. So in the beginning, I think we will see a lot of money or gold actually going out of the system. Also going in a lot, but I think at this time it's still very interesting to do raw gold farms. Later on, they will lose more and more because inflation comes and it will be less interesting. And when the dailies finally come in a very late part of the game, I think they are not so interesting anymore, but I think they can cover your cost, and also they are very available for casuals. So a casual who says, okay, he wants to play half an hour a day in the evening quickly, he can just do the dailies without doing much, and this is a good thing for them.
I was going to say, I believe that dailies are a good supplement to other income sources to kind of help you, like I've already been touched on, get your epic flying and afford your raid consumes. But to rely on them purely on dailies, I believe, until, like was touched on with Isle of Quell Danaz coming out, I don't think it's a viable way to do your rating, to acquire your rating supplies. Because if everyone is like, oh, I'm just going to log on 30 minutes a day, I'm going to do my dailies and I'll be good, then you have that problem of everyone's having more raw gold, but there's also less commodity items coming into the economy to be purchased. So you're going to have less supply, but still that high demand. So prices will rise out of people's reach from just dailies because everyone has that same amount of gold. So if everyone has the same amount of gold as a baseline, then eventually people will just keep raising the prices until, the equilibrium happens.
Gargoyle, I want to keep it with you because I've got my next question teed up here and I need you to listen to this one. Because this, I hope, will be right in your wheelhouse, but feel free to pass if you want to pass to one of the other guys. And this is a chicken or the egg type question. And I want to ask you, which came first, the GDKP or the gold seller? And how will they affect TBC as opposed to Classic?
Well, I think gold sellers probably came first, but I think this is a weird thing to talk about because when you talk about GDKP specifically, I think that's something that's a bit more unique to Classic. Whereas when I look at a GDKP, I think of it not as, people bidding for items, but rather the idea of using gold to purchase a raid item. And that has been around since, at the very least, to my knowledge, TBC original. Because I know my guild, we sold, different carries, different items on the economy back in TBC, back in Wrath. So from the perspective of using gold to buy items, I think that's been around forever.
Sorry to interrupt, mate. Just getting more at, rather than, I was being a bit cheeky there, rather than getting at chronologically which happened, I'm sort of saying which fuels the other, because I've seen arguments in Discord recently in terms of, GDKPs would not exist if it weren't for gold sellers. No, you're an idiot. Gold sellers wouldn't exist if it weren't for GDKPs, if you know what I mean, and the circle goes round and round and round. So where do you kind of sit on that one?
I think GDKPs fuel gold sellers. It creates a market for the gold sellers to cater to. Whereas the GDKPs probably more originated from people doing things like the raw Mage Gold farm and ZF from phase 1, or Mage boosts that have been used also since phase 1. Just people like, hey, I got a Mage ult, I want to buy a bunch of gear so I can do carries more efficiently. And then guilds started just selling excess items, from tier 1 onwards. And then it just kind of evolved into, well, why don't we just host a group of us that will just bid on items instead? And then the real world money traders came in and catered to everyone who doesn't have that giant pile of gold just laying around from a mage ult doing boosts. So they just sell to the people who need the excess gold.
All right. Does anyone else want to chime in on this one in terms of how you think there may be any difference, or will it just be business as usual, unfortunately, in terms of how we as a player base have to deal with gold sellers and the waterfall effect with GDKPs in TBC?
I do agree with Gargoyle that it's GDKP which creates the need for gold selling more than the other way around. I mean, I come from a server where GDKP rates are extremely rare, and neither me nor most people I know have ever felt even the need for buying gold, because even the most expensive stuff, like for example Edgemaster Handguards, cap at around like 4,000 or 5,000 gold, which is a lot, but still within the reach of normal play at this point. Whereas the kind of stuff you see in GDKP runs, like people spending 15,000 gold, 30,000 gold, or even more for a certain item, you can only acquire that gold basically, in two ways: either doing GDKP runs, but it sort of becomes a vicious circle, or by buying gold. So, yes, I think that without GDKP runs, there is just not enough need for gold, even in Classic, to fuel gold selling.
I think they live like their separate lives, to be honest. But I will agree with Sarah. On my server in Classic, I haven't seen any GDKP runs advertised. So I don't know if it's like more of an American issue, the GDKP runs compared to EU servers, or if it's just like our servers that don't really have it. But I think gold selling will always be needed. And I think a lot of people will be buying gold to get their epic flyers, and they will be buying gold to get their spell strike set and their frozen shadow weave and all these kind of things. I mean, in the beginning of TBC, there is a huge demand of gold, like people have talked about numerous times already. And I think that will be like a field day for the gold sellers. They will be able to make a lot of money in the beginning.
I'm going to dive in and save you there, YOLO, save you from some angry emails, because I knew what you were talking about, and I'll just let you clarify. When you say gold sellers are always going to be needed, you mean there's always going to be a demand for the gold from people, as opposed to, actually needs gold selling. All right. Anyone else want to chime in on this one before I move on?
I was just saying, YOLO's right. Like, I remember getting the spam emails or spam in-game mails back in like TBC, like when it first released. Like GDKP wasn't a thing then. Like, we are always going to be stuck with these people.
But that's something which is just normal, because people hire somebody to clean or to do the garden or something like this. So in the end, it's always only a question if you are interested in trading real money with time consume. And especially in World of Warcraft, we have a lot of people who played the game 15 years ago. They were younger, had less money, more time. Now they have more money, less time. So I think this effect you will always have, more or less official or not.
I can assure everyone that with age, I'm too broke to afford a cleaner, and I'm too broke in WoW to afford any items in a GDKP. So I don't know the feeling yet, but I understand that a lot of people are taking part in this.
I mean, in a certain way, you can't have at the same time a gold currency that has value and not have gold sellers, because the only way not to have gold sellers, aside from banning them, but I mean, that's a bit idealistic, is for gold to basically have no value, so people don't feel the need to go buy it. But of course, that's probably not something we want. So as long as gold functions in an economy, in a healthy economy, the unfortunate consequence is that we always have demand, as you said, for gold selling.
Yeah, and I would agree as well. It's like the gold sellers have always been around. I was kind of getting to that point about like the history time, but I think GDKPs kind of exacerbate the problem of gold selling and make the gold sellers more lucrative. So you see more bots, you see more sellers, you see more people trying to do that type of business. And then with all that gold selling going on, it kind of has the inflation problems that we've talked about, that now, well, all these tides are rising, so you need to rise with them, or you're just going to not be able to afford to play the game, like if you want to be a raider or something like that.
But I think actually it's quite exciting, because I think to some degree it's like a closed ecosystem by now. So you have some people who are selling gold, and I think many of them are also arranging GDKP runs. So then they're getting the gold that they sold to a guy, they're getting that back in the GDKP run and then selling it again. So I think that's like, it's, of course they're fueling each other, but I think if all gold sellers disappeared, we would still have GDKP runs, but just with like more reasonable prices. And if all GDKP runs would disappear, we would still have gold sellers as well.
All right, guys. We'll definitely come back to that topic, so don't worry about if you haven't said your piece yet on RMT or gold selling or anything like that. I've got plenty of more of that coming up. But we'll move on to this one, which, again, we have slightly touched on. It might be a pretty quick one. We've touched on this earlier in the podcast in other episodes too, in terms of people making their sort of early guesses on where the figure might stand. But primals, your primal fires, blah, blah, blah. Primers, insert silly figure here, whatever your arbitrary silly figure or best guess might be. Primals will cost, I don't know, 30,000 gold each in TBC. What I'm getting at is it will be a ridiculous amount of money. True or false?
False, I'd say.
I'd say that it will depend on the server. I mean, it would be easier to say how many plague blooms will a primal be worth in terms of comparing Classic to TBC than giving a raw amount of gold.
Certain primals are just way more useful and in demand than others. Like primal earths never get that expensive. Primal fires and primal manas can get very expensive, depending on like when we're talking about.
And it also does depend a lot on like how the servers play out in terms of, do we have layering? Do we have sharding? Like, what spawn rates do we have? And things like this that might be tweaked or changed based on whatever metrics that Blizzard's going to carry over from Classic. Especially if we get straight progression servers, some servers might need even more layers than they have now. And some servers that are on single layers might now need layers just because of the dynamic that Outland has compared to, the original world.
I don't think we will see primal prices over 100 gold for a very long time, at least. I'll bet on that. So the fires, the mana, and the primal air, which I expect will be the most expensive, I don't think they will be above 100 gold.
All right, a primal might BOP or BOE. Oh, sorry, not BOE. You know what I mean?
You can trade it. It's tradable.
Yeah, they're tradable.
And they will of course be a lot higher because that's like a collection of different primals, right? And it's a cooldown as well. So it's like another kind of primal.
Right, so you wouldn't include that in your 100 gold prediction?
No, not at all.
No, because that's not farmable. It's not directly farmable, that is.
Those are going to be so expensive to start with.
Okay, all right. Guys, we'll move on, and I'll hit you up with this one. And this is a quote from someone who I know is watching along at home, a former guest on the show. Booth, mates, good to have you here. Hopefully you get a kick out of this one. I found this quote from him on the subreddit. And I've slightly changed your words, mate. I hope you don't get upset with me, but you essentially said this. An economic reset will only make the poor poorer. Who do they think is going to allow them to farm Elemental Plateau? The price of herbs and ores will be much higher too, because there won't be anyone on a flying mount. True or false, or should I just say agree or disagree, guys? So an economic reset will only make the poor poorer.
I totally agree. I think all the way in the beginning, I kind of made my point about this, that the the tryhards will either find loopholes or they will farm. I think it's Stay Safe who made a video about it where he said the casuals will need weeks, if not months, to recuperate, but the tryhards will need days to recuperate.
Yeah, like I think we've kind of touched on this multiple times at this point about the idea that, like Wille said, just when you have a reset like that, people who can prepare or invest the extra time right off the bat will just essentially be back in the same position, while the player who's like, slowly accrued that gold over 2 years or a year and a half or whatever ends up being the lifespan of Classic now has essentially a reset to reaccrue that gold again.
Besides the economy, the economic power of a player depends not just on how much gold he has, but also on how many alts he has, what professions he has. And the people who are rich now generally have not only a lot of gold, but also a lot of alts, a lot of maxed professions that most poor people simply don't have. And so they will be able to become even richer in a fresher condition.
But a reset could also mean a fresh server. So I think you have to see this a little different. A reset with a fresh server, I think this would make no big difference than to the servers we have today. But if you do try to do a reset on an existing server, I totally agree. The people who have not much yet will stay poorer even.
But don't you think even if you did a complete reset, then the tryhards would level much faster and have a lot of time by themselves to farm expensive materials, and the same balance would be made again, but and fairly quick.
Yeah, the same, exactly. It would be the same and not a different one. So they would not be poorer. Yeah. Just they would have less gold, yes, but compared to the gold in the game, it would be similar. So they are not poorer out of my point of view.
Yeah, and I would kind of look to phase 1 and maybe even phase 2 I don't know how your guys' servers were, but for my server, we really didn't see the big inflation of a lot of items happen until late phase 1, early phase 2, probably a little after Dire Maul. Before that, it was you could get a lot of these what are now 2-3 gold items for 20, 30, 40 silver. And so the gold inflation hadn't happened yet, and people hadn't established their farm setups yet. So you would have this period at the start where, yes, the people the tryhards are already max level and they're already farming and they're already maybe investing. But as the other people start trickling into cap, there just isn't enough gold in the economy for all those prices to be absolutely outrageous yet.
Something I think we're ignoring a little bit is the influx of new people that would likely come with a new expansion, and saying that the same people will be rich if we reset the economy and we're on a new server. That gives a big opportunity for people that aren't playing the game to build a good fortune and compete with the established people. At least that's what I would think.
Yes, they're probably the only group that actually would gain something tangible from a reset, but it's
nobody would be established. That's exactly the point. And then it's clearly that everybody has the same chance. But I think we come back to this later for sure. But this is the unique selling point of Blizzard, that you have a server which will continue to exist. If they take this away and do a new start for everybody forced, I guess private servers will have a good bit of fun.
But it's also worth stressing again that the only way to achieve that actual even ground is with a full fresh server, either level 1 or level 58. No kind of gold cap, gold reset or whatever would achieve that, because the sheer amount of alts with professions and so on will still be too much for new people to just expect an even ground without an actual fresh server.
The idea of if we did a full fresh start, you might get more people coming back because they'd be on the even footing. But I also know people who have come out and directly said, if there is a full fresh start, level 1, level 58, whatever, and you lose any character progression you already have, they just aren't interested in playing anymore because they're invested in their characters. They're not invested in, some people are invested in their wallets, some people are invested in their character, and some people are invested in the journey. And so having that hard reset might bring some people in who are well, now it's a hard reset. I have equal footing. I don't have to worry about these people who are just dominating the market. But you also have those people who go, well, there's a hard reset. I've lost everything. I'm not interested. And they just walk away.
And one last thing. There is the possibility of doing progressing servers and also offering fresh servers for TBC. So they can go to both markets anyhow without any big effort. Why should they risk to lose a big market?
We're kind of veering a little bit off of the economic discussion here and going into like a business discussion for Blizzard at this point, with the idea of having some servers that are progression servers and some servers that are fresh start servers, to kind of create the protections for those fresh start servers. You would essentially have to have them be like on their own like island, essentially. And so you kind of run into this weird problem where now you're introducing complexity into the systems that Blizzard has to manage all their servers, and more complexity usually means you have to have more infrastructure on the back end, which is more money that Blizzard has to invest into the project. And
but they already have this with the different regions. They have this with PvE and PvP. This is something they are used to, and if they do fresh classic servers, they will have different server types. So I think to put a new group of servers in each region, let's say 3, 4, 5, I don't know, and say these are one group and nobody can move into this group. It's like a third group, not PvP, not PvE, but a third one is easy for them to manage.
I think you have to be careful to not split up the community in too many small groups. And I think, of course, there are some people who hates Classic and loves TBC, and I'm in a guild with a lot of them. And even they started playing Classic just to prepare for TBC. And if you hate it that much, then I think we will see some people who just say, okay, I'm going to buy a level 60 and I'm going to buy 10,000 gold from real money trading, and then they're on equal footing either way. So, I don't think the market for completely fresh servers will be that big, and I think it will be kind of a gamble for Blizzard to divide their community even further.
We'll get there, guys. Zerator, I know you want to chime in on that one. We'll come back to fresh servers in a little bit. I just want to, we've got I think 3 or 4 more of these questions, and then we'll get to the other stuff too. This is a weird one, and by all means, tell me if it's a shit question, guys. Bit of an abstract one. But if I were to say to you that it's hard to take people seriously when they argue for or against gold caps or economy resets, because everyone arguing one way or another is simply trying to protect their own individual interests over the interests of the server. Would you say that's true or false? Do you know what I mean? Do you see all these comments and you see someone absolutely going to the mat for no gold cap, no server reset? Do you just presume, oh, they've just got 200,000 gold and that's why they're saying that? But then on the other hand, if you see someone say reset everything, you're like, well, I can see who fucking made no money in Classic.
I sort of invite these people if they exist, because I still haven't figured out what would be best for me, to be honest. I can think of good pros and cons. For me personally, not for the whole community. I don't know what will be the best option for me. So if there are people who know, I'm happy for them, but I have no idea, to be honest.
But I think most people advertise their own perspective clearly, because they see this perspective easily, and the other side is difficult, as in any argument you have in your life. So I think clearly people arguing for one side, strongly for one side, usually have a reason why they do this. And if you look in YouTube and you see all the comments there are guys who really made a lot of thoughts about it. And they always forget one group, or to hit one group. And this means for me, yes, they are in this group. But that's in any discussion you have with any economical target, that the lobbyism is always there.
Yeah, to be honest, that's also something that I have never quite understood, because, it's not like you, me, or these people have probably any kind of power to actually take these decisions. Generally, when, at least speaking for myself, when I argue for this stuff, even vehemently so, I generally argue from the perspective of what is reasonable to expect Blizzard to do. So, for example, when it came to cross realm battlegrounds in Classic, I vehemently argued that Blizzard would have done cross realm battlegrounds, even if it certainly wasn't in my interest because I was a Horde PvE player. So of course I would have preferred to have at least a smaller battle groups or something like that. But I knew that it was, unrealistic. So even now, I generally argued in favor of no kind of goal cap, not much because it's what I think is best for me, but I simply think that it's what is most reasonable to expect Blizzard to do, because I think it's really hard to tell what's best for you because there are a lot of different aspects to consider. I mean, if you are, for example, a very hardcore person, as we discussed before, sure, you have a lot to gain if you don't reset your whole fortune, but you can also gain a lot of advantage if there is a reset. So where would you be better off? I don't know. I don't think it's so easy to tell.
All right. Naismith, let me throw this one to you, man, even though I know a couple of the other guys here, like Zerator in particular plays a paladin. Here's one for you to start with, though, Naismith, to get you started. Question. Paladin gold farming will do to the economy what mage gold farming did to Classic. True or false?
Maybe. But the ability for paladins to farm stuff, like we've talked about in Shadow Moon Valley, is very, very powerful. There are two places, like the Path of Conquest and then on top of the Black Temple, where they can just sit and farm like either blood elves or demons, and you can get any number of BOEs, which is always good. You can get the stuff for the Aldor or the Scryers, depending on where you're farming, which is pretty much always valuable. And then just the raw gold you get, which is not much, but it's nothing to sneeze at either. They have a lot of very good advantages for farming.
I agree that they have a lot of advantages for farming, but I do not believe that they will hit the same impact that mages had. Mages have just been essentially destroying the economy since very early on with a lot of their AoE farms, and the fact that paladins can't do the same scale that mages can in Classic. And in TBC, the alternatives are more lucrative, that it means that while they will have a impact, it will not be as large as the mage in Classic impact has been.
I would agree with that.
I will put it in these terms. I don't know if they will, but I don't think anybody else could. I mean, if there is one candidate, that's them, but I'm not sure they actually have the ability to do it as much as mages did in Classic.
And don't forget, they also can add, if they have two accounts, they don't have to multi-box, just two accounts, and have a druid behind the paladin, and move with a 3-set T1 with the thorns stronger and the mark of the wild. They can even push this matter to the next level and sometimes push out a heal. I think this will be insane. It will not be as much as the mages do now. Now they are really crazy, but I'm very sure it will be not far away from it.
All right. Guys, next question. True or false? Now, I know we touched on this earlier, and we've talked about the bigger gold sinks, like obviously epic flying mounts, etc. But crafted sets are the gold sinks we need to save us in TBC. When I say save us, obviously I'm referring to things like inflation and huge buckets of gold being hoarded on every player. True or false? Crafted sets.
False, yes.
False.
Because there's no sink. Sink is only if gold leaves the game. The crafted sets, you move money from one player to the other. So in the end, there's no gold lost. It's just changed the owner. And the people use the set. So we will have goods going out of the market, yes, because they are consumed. But effectively, there's no gold lost. So
exactly,
no sink.
I 100% agree.
I disagree with that, because once you make the item, it doesn't have the same monetary value for anyone else besides you. I mean, you will trade it at some point, and you will vendor it for 10 gold. So an item that cost you 1,000 gold to make will now be worth 10 gold afterwards.
But the 1,000 golds are owned by others. They are not out of the game. And you always have, in the economy, you always have to see there's one is the gold amount and one is the good amount. And yes, by using the good, you are taking the goods out of. So you have an effect on the inflation. That is true. But you have no sink. The gold is not gone. It's just traded to somebody else.
Yeah, it's true.
No, you're right. I have been shamed. I shouldn't have used that term sink. You're exactly right, Vivikas. But in terms of the effect that just those, very, very expensive crafted sets will have on the player base, do you feel like if it weren't there, just having the epic flying mount and obviously other expenses along the way wouldn't be enough, even though we're just trading the money from player to player? It's still something that is important to have players dropping money on things like this.
So what you mean, Josh, just to see if I understood correctly, is crafted sets, according to this question, are the kind of thing that will allow this money that is currently owned by rich people to basically re-enter the economy and get out of their hands, so to speak, in that sense?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I'm just saying, is it... What I'm getting at, it should have been more of a sink, because that's probably the more important thing to focus on, is that if we are going to try and take or remove liquid gold or liquid assets from these people that are so insanely wealthy, then obviously we want a gold sink rather than just buying a craft set and trading that money to another player. It's kind of then just the circle goes round and round. So I can already see.
You wanted some of the mats to be super expensive that you can only get from like a vendor or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. I can see obviously now the problems with the question, but if I rephrased it to be something like, does TBC, would it have needed more sinks like this that actually not penalize the player but took from their pocket a bit more? Would that have helped us in what the transition we're about to go through from Classic to TBC?
But I'm unsure who needs saving from this phenomenon.
Well, I'm saying if we are trying to whittle down, we're talking about, the 1% and the 2% or whatever, or all the wealth being with such a small percentage of the server, if we are trying to whittle that down.
Yeah, but I mean, I think inflation in some sense, or these inflated prices, and to the same extent gold sellers selling money and flooding the market with liquid gold, will in some sense help the player who likes to just play the game casually and usually, because he will be out there and he will find a rare recipe from one time to another and find a random BOE and stuff, and then it will sell for double the amount that it would have normally sold for, and he will be able to buy a flying mount more easily. But of course, if he wants to trade it to other goods that are sold by players, he will not have an advantage. But I mean, the inflation will help everyone get epic flying mount a lot.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for trying to save me, Wille. It was a terrible question.
I mean, I actually agree in this with Josh in the sense that I do think that crafted sets in TBC will play a crucial positive role in terms of, let's say, equalizing the economy. Because let's compare it to Classic. I'll be quick. In Classic, there were a few rare, very important receipts and a few very rare, hard-to-get mats. So what happened is that basically the gold entered a sort of closed circle between the people with the important receipts, the people who controlled the important mats, and a lot of people found themselves completely cut out of the market. Instead, these receipts in TBC, and I'm thinking not much of the crafted sets like Spellstrike, but the mats like Spellclaw, for example. Those mats are something that will be produced by a lot of people, not just the few who control those resource spots. So the gold that the rich people have will not go in the hands of other few rich people, but will be distributed between a lot more players who will then not have so much gold that they can control market in return, but will actually be wealthy players who just buy normally stuff like leather, consumables, and so on. And so the money will actually trickle down more naturally, more healthily than what we have seen in Classic. At least this is my prediction for TBC.
I think it is more like a gate. The ability to craft such good items in such a large amount will be more a gate for people to get into the sweaty guilds to raid or to do the content with them. And people, but it will not, yes, there will be trade for this, but this will be for all of it. And money moving around will be very important all the time. But I think it actually gives most of the normal players who do not want to have this in the first couple of weeks an opportunity to earn quite a bit of money of these people, and then to use this money for other things, and especially for things which are not influenced by the inflation, because they have always the same price like the flying mount. So I think, yes, I partly agree with Serator that it will help more people to get money. But I think the major thing of these crafted items is a gating for the hardcore guilds.
Yeah, I think it will help for wealth equality, and it will spread it out. And exactly like you said, Vivikas, if you can wait 2 months getting your tailoring set, you should just sell all of your cloth in the first weeks, and you will sell it for triple the price that you can buy it a bit later down the road. And that will, of course, help distribute the money a bit more evenly, because the very rich players will not really care about the price. They will just buy everything at the beginning, and then the more casual players can get it later on, but they can profit at the beginning as well.
Well, that bleeds into my next question and final question from this section of the chat, guys. And thank you so much. You've all been doing so well in going through these questions one by one. But talking about, the wealth gap is, and I'm glad that last question wasn't my last one. We'll end on a high note with this one. True or false? And I've got a quote to read out accompanying this one. The gap between the haves and the have-nots will grow substantially in the Burning Crusade. And I want to read you this quote from the Discord from Nostalgia Dad, who says the following. My big concern that keeps getting skipped over is real money transfer. A lot of what you're discussing regarding TBC private server economies, or back in original TBC, is not factoring RMT into the evaluation. You asked, and he was talking to someone obviously, you asked earlier why an inflated economy is bad, and there was then a lot of its economics 101 being tossed around without mentioning what happens in an economy with long-term hyperinflation, stagflation. But instead of skyrocketing unemployment under regular stagflation, WoW tends to see plummeting server populations. Classic has just seen that, with many players too frustrated with the astronomical consumable costs who end up just quitting the game entirely. Yes, the consumables list is shorter in TBC. Yes, you won't need to buy new gems all the time. Yes, craftable items like Spellstrike or Ebon Netherscale are one-time only. But having a proportionally small percentage of the player base with large amounts of golds, I'm talking 20,000 plus, that can immediately buy their epic flyer, thereby making moat extraction, herbing, and mining a competition only for those with epic flying, then creates more of a gap between the average player and this small group of players. It means these very rich players can simply corner the market and set prices however they like. It means an inflated costs on those one-time use crafted items. It means gold is then a higher premium, leading to higher motivation for RMT farmers, which leads to higher competition on farmable mats, which then leads to more RMT, which then leads average players, not people with 5 alchemy alts, to either buy gold via RMT, like a large number of players I encounter are doing, or frustration, which then leads to population shrinkage. So, once again, guys, the gap between the haves and the have-nots will grow substantially in TBC. True or false? Hit me.
False.
False. I think we've kind of already touched on a couple of the points that were brought up. The first one being, like, there will be the sweaties who, week one get their epic flying, and then they have the small advantage, but a lot outside of like some very specific farming spots that only need, a couple people to saturate. You have all the people on the ground that will still be saturating any nodes or anything available there. And so then this gap, like this concept of cornering the market just really doesn't hold any weight in TBC. And so it doesn't create a situation where, these very rich people are just scooping up all the materials and then selling at a higher price.
Yeah, you said everything that I had written down and that I wanted to say.
Yeah, I also think it's already said the most of it. And last but not least, when you talk about real money transfer, there's also the possibility of the transfer between servers. So if there is a server which is really very high pricing, there will be people starting getting mats from other servers because they can transfer them, not the gold, but the mats. And so they will move mats there, and so they will undercut on this side. So even if you would have the possibility, as long as there are enough servers you can get the mats from, or at least for a much cheaper price, you will have this kind of transfer. And it's also more or less a real money transfer because you pay for a transfer, but to Blizzard, at least it's legal in a way. But you will see this then happening. And so I also don't think it's really happening this strongly. The absolute number will be higher the absolute number of gold will be higher between the rich and the poor, but the effect of it will be the same.
But I also don't think, end game TBC, I don't think gold has that much weight. And as I'm saying it, I'm kind of regretting because in Sunwell Plateau, crafting comes back into the game and will be very expensive as well. But I think if you're a casual raider, you can more easily raid lock. It's also pretty easy in vanilla, to be honest, but it's pretty easy to raid lock in TBC and to do dailies, not even every day, but perhaps every other day, and you buy one flask and you buy some mana potions if you're a caster, for instance, or a healer, and then you go to a raid, and that's literally everything you need. So there will be some people who are extremely rich, but they will also feel like they have nothing really to spend their money on to gain an advantage later.
We certainly won't see the kind of extreme frustration we see right now. Just to make a personal example, I spend roughly the equivalent of like 4 hours of farming for each Naxxramas night, and I do like 3 Naxxramas raids per week. Of course, I stockpiled most of that kind of stuff in advance, months in advance, but those people who didn't are the first who are feeling the burnout right now. You won't see this in TBC. It won't take like 4 hours to collect the consumables for something like, for example, Black Temple, because most of this stuff is stuff that you can farm for yourself, even without having so many alts, because it's like fishing, it's like getting a bit of leather and so on. So there is a hard cap to how much time you may need to find those consumables. And craftables don't really create the same kind of burnout because the casual won't quit the game just because they can't get their epic weapon week 1. They just wait like 4-8 weeks to get it, but they will get it. What creates burnout is the feel of not being able to keep up. So every raid, you still need that amount of gold, and you feel like you can't just keep up with that demand week after week. And you won't have this in TBC.
Yeah, I was going to kind of jump off and kind of like use Zerador's point where for my guild, for example, our week 1 Naxxramas progression, each raider burned through probably around 3,000 gold of consumables. That's week 1 for progression. And so we essentially had to then resupply for week 2 and every week beyond. We've thankfully cut down our raid night substantially since week 1. But for some guilds on my server, like they just got KT and they've been raiding, 3-4 nights a week. And so you're talking about in a neighborhood of, in the first 3 weeks, they're probably burning 10,000-15,000 gold. That's just, that amount of gold is not required for TBC raiding. And so that burnout stage doesn't really happen in the same way.
I don't think burnout comes just from the financial concerns, though. Burnout a lot of time comes from stagnation, and like as a guild, like you're not getting what you want done. But I mean, that's been my experience where like guilds have fallen apart. It's not because like we all of a sudden lack money. It's because we can't do what we really want to, which is down bosses.
I think they kind of play into each other, right? So in Classic, not being able to down bosses means you need to now reconsume even more frequently, which means you need to then spend more hours outside of raid time farming those consumes. And so it's like a vicious cycle where it just like causes you to just need to spend more and more and more time in the game. And for a lot of people, they just aren't able to put that time into the game if they're stuck on a boss, kind of like what you're talking about, where you just banging your head against the wall and every pull is 250, 500 gold of consumes. It gets to be very brutal very quickly. Whereas in TBC, it's like, if you know you're going to be on progression, you just bring a flask, you don't lose it on death, and you just bring a stack of potions and a stack of food and you're good to go.
It also creates a sort of vicious cycle in Classic, because if a few people start not using consumables and either people die or the people who don't use consumables die on fights like Loophole, for example, then the people who did use consumables wipe because other people didn't use consumables will feel even more of a burnout and anger than before. So it quickly snowballs out of control. As soon as a few people can't afford consumables anymore, the other people who still can will feel even more frustrated than before. Whereas in TBC, you have stuff like cauldrons, for example, for protection potions, and there are really not any kind of fights where you have to chug through a lot of consumables like Loophole, for example. So in general, you really won't have this kind of burnout. Even if there are a few people who are a bit cheap, they will still be able to be covered by guilds. We also have functioning guild banks in TBC. So in general, we won't have this kind of concern. I played TBC for like a couple of years on private servers, and I never seen this kind of problems that we have now in Classic.
Guild banks they're not like right away in TBC. That was something that was added later.
I think it's 2.3 or something. Was it 2.3? Something I've seen.
Yeah, it was pretty late. I want to say it was, I think you're right on a 2.3. And I would say probably the biggest thing I really wish they had put into in Classic would be the guild banks. Just trying to manage all the materials that go in and out of guild banks is always just a big hassle. And it's like a bunch of overhead that you just have to deal with. Somebody has to do it just because they didn't put this one feature in. Guys, I've got while that's it for the questions, I've got a few other things I want to touch on. And Vivicus, I want to throw this one to you. I feel like this might be a good one for you to kick us off with. And this is a quote from the subreddit from Aries42, more about just the overall health of the economy. And I know every server is different, but if we could kind of throw a blanket over it, because we've had all these conversations just now about, what's right, what's wrong, how we play the game, how we deal with the economy, how should it be done, what shouldn't be done, and all of that stuff. But this quote really goes towards, is the economy even broken that we need to fix, or is everything just fine? And Aries42 says this: I see a lot of people making claims about how the Classic economy is screwed without really having any understanding of how the macroeconomics of Classic works. In reality, the Classic economy is exactly where it should be, and it has been for months at this point. With the way the WoW economy works, the inflation will always develop towards the balance point, where people favor trading over grinding, and it will never go far beyond that point. Most servers reached that point something between 6 to 9 months ago after the release of Classic. Since then, inflation has been a complete non-factor, and any change in prices you see these days are driven by supply and demand, not inflation. With the release of TBC, the balance point is going to change again, as the ability to grind gold drastically increases. But even if Blizzard decides to put in some of the measures people are begging for, it's probably only going to take a few months before it balances out again, and we reach the point where the vast majority of wealth generation is trading, not grinding. Basically, there's no quote-unquote fixing the Classic economy without an extensive design overhaul to the entire game.
The only difference now compared to the old days is that people push it to its balance point much quicker, in the same way everything else is done with much greater efficiency these days. So, Vivicus, my question from all of that, I hope you took all that in. I'm sure your big economic brain understood everything going on there, things that gloss over my head. But is the classic economy broken now, or are we moving into TBC exactly as we should be?
I think it's not broken. It's just at a point where people don't like it much. It's in real life the same. Not working makes you rich. It's having money and having your money play, which makes you rich in the end. So at this point we are there. You can see, and as we discussed here before, the raw gold and the getting money from quests is getting more and more not important. And more you will earn money by trading goods and the people paying for them. And in this case, people having the belief they need to have everything nowadays. They need to be maxed out on anything. Yeah, this means they are willing to pay more. And so that's why this balance point perhaps has reached a little too high than it should be. But this is just a question of your perspective. But I think the market is exactly doing what was expected. In the beginning, it's raising a lot because the raw gold quantity which comes in has a higher effect, and the more gold there is. So in the beginning, there's 50,000 gold on the server and you get 50 new. The effect is quite big. But if you have 5 million already on the server, 50 is nothing. And there is this guy who always does the videos killing 500 of each type of mob. And in the end, he does something really interesting. He shows how much raw gold he got and how much he got from vendoring items to the vendor, and the rest he sells on the auction house. So you can see exactly at this point how much gold he actually brought into the game by doing what he did, and how much is just for the trading. And most money he earns is only from the trading, from moving money around. And actually this is one of the things of the game, because the auction house fee takes money out of the game. So for me, I'm agreeing with most. I mean, there were some aspects which are confusing, but I'm agreeing to most of it, that the economy will find this certain point where people are not able to achieve so much by working anymore. They have to do this by doing smart, not hard. And this point will always come to a certain situation, and especially with the high number of people being on the servers, it makes a lot of these these resources which are not in the instances, makes them difficult to achieve. And for example, if you look Black Lotus in the beginning, there was perhaps 24 each region, 4 regions, so 100 a day, so 700 a day. There was 700 Black Lotus each server could create, best case. And if the server has 5,000 people or has 20,000 people, I think, yeah, you see the problem coming there. And this was the part which has the people feeling that the economy is broken. But I think the economy is not broken. It's just these small areas where it seems to be so. For the rest, I'm totally agreeing to the statement.
Yeah, I think Vivek has pretty much hit the nail on the head. I was going to say, I agree with the statement for the most part. And I believe the principles that they're talking about is 100% true, especially like in a vacuum state. But I believe that there are a few commodity items like the Black Lotus, what is probably the biggest pain point, where it does definitely feel like it's broken because of the way, just the mechanics of how Black Lotus come into the economy. And we kind of get relieved from that in TBC. So you won't really have these really sticking pain points like that come TBC. And so the economy will normalize much, where it's like you can either make a lot of gold just by farming raw gold, or you can make it by farming commodities or by trading, standard auction house fare, buy low, sell high, stuff like that.
I mean, was pretty much what I was trying to say before about dailies, for example, and why people shouldn't rely too much on them, because that's how economy works.
Too easy. All right, guys, look, I want to talk, and Gargoyle, I'll kick you off with this one because we did want to dive into a bit more of the RMT and botting issue. And I know we touched on this earlier, but I'll really sort of let you pull the gloves off now and sink your teeth into this one. I just wanted to start you off, if you'll please humor me for 2 minutes here, because like I said, I read these theses on virtual economies before we started recording, and I just wanted to read something interesting that I found. I don't agree with what I'm about to read, but I did find it interesting nonetheless. So this is from that paper that I mentioned at the top with the Castronova paper from 2002, which is considered sort of, the progenitor of talks about virtual economies. And they were talking about the EverQuest economy, but I think the principles obviously remain the same, even though we're talking about World of Warcraft. And they say this, it's important to stress that the external, this is going to take 2 minutes, guys, so I'm just going to do a bit of a monologue here. It's important to stress that the external market for Nerathian goods is underground. Sony has stated that Nerathian items are its intellectual property. Trading these items for US currency is considered theft. Nonetheless, the trade goes on. Even consensual real money transfers are a powerful force in modern popular MMORPGs, yet the nature of their existence is often misunderstood. While many developers take a hardline stance against RMTs as they can potentially threaten a game's profitability, these same developers fail to fix or even understand the reasons why RMTs occur in the first place. Contrary to popular perception, the sale of virtual wealth is not necessarily a means of quote-unquote cheating the game system, cheating the game system to gain an edge over opponents, but is instead an economic response to shoddy game design. Not only is it possible to understand and model exactly why most RMTs occur in the first place, it's also possible to reduce or even effectively eliminate RMT through better game design. Sidebar again, I don't agree with this, I'm just reading it out. While developers and many players see RMT as a spreading plague that threatens the quality of their games, there are others who see it as a natural expansion of online play. MMORPG players spend a great deal of time working on their virtual characters. In many cases, the effort it takes to reach a high character level or acquire a rare in-game item is comparable to the effort put into a real-life project. Many players feel that the fruits of their labor, virtual characters and items, are theirs to sell by right of the work they put into them. Many take up the banner of the Lockean theory of labor, and a player in a case study asserted, "We've invested considerable labor, i.e. playing time, into obtaining our assets. Therefore, we are entitled to exercise ownership over them." Yet player-signed EULAs stipulate that this is not the case, and many courts in South Korea, where the RMT business is continually subjected to judicial review, usually rule on the side of game developers against third-party RMT market vendors. One court stipulated that because all virtual items produced in an MMORPG were designed and blueprinted by the developers, in-game items cannot claim the status of a good or property and are simple functions within an intellectual property known as a game program. While it is true that virtual items were originally designed by a game's developers, they nonetheless require a good deal of artificial quote-unquote work to produce them. So who truly owns virtual property? Now, thank you so much, guys, for sitting through that very, very exhaustive quote. But Gargoyle, I'm going to get you. I'd use this to sort of light a fire under you to get you started on your thoughts on RMT, because this quote does sort of get into the psyche a little bit of players that dabble in RMT, and they might very well sit there at home and feel, it's my fucking character. I'll do what I fucking want with it. I don't have the time to be farming and doing all this shit. I'll buy whatever I want. What, this guy's selling 1,000 gold for $20? Mate, that's the price of a pizza. Load me up. Fuck you, Blizzard. Whatever. And then obviously Blizzard has not been policing it quite as much as we would like. What are your thoughts on RMT in general and its place in online gaming, Gargoyle?
I think for Classic specifically, we're in a state where there's no sanctioned RMT. So RMT should not be something that people practice or condone or participate with, purely because it changes the playing field, right? Because the whole purpose of the game is that you're playing with other people, but you're also playing under a certain set of rules. And the moment somebody like starts going outside those rules, they gain a distinct advantage, whether that be from something as simple as being able to, just raid log even more and just not having to put the extra time in. But that could also be translated into direct character power, because say you have two people who can only put in the same number of hours. One person does RMT, the other person doesn't. The person with RMT then has a distinct advantage by being able to bring more consumables or maybe even purchase gear from a GDKP. So it breaks down the fabric of the game in the sense that it should be an even playing field where the better players or the more dedicated players gain the advantage. So from that perspective, I would say from a WoW Classic perspective, RMT really just shouldn't be something that people are participating with. And doing so really kind of does destroy that fabric of the game. Whereas if you look towards retail WoW, they have RMT built into the game. Everyone has that same option that is condoned by the game. Whether or not you believe that's right or wrong for the game is a different discussion, but it is condoned by the publisher, by Blizzard, through their EULA, that you can just straight up buy gold. And the game is in a different state where some people might not feel that's necessary just because of how much gold you get in the game. But in WoW Classic, where gold is much harder to come by, then you have RMT that circumvents that one stage of difficulty, even if that difficulty really is just a time sink. Trying to remember the rest of the quote that was on there, because it was like the main points were like the player doesn't own really any of their quote unquote property within the game, right? It's all part of the EULA and part of the agreement that you say, I'm going to play the game and I'm going to play by the rules that Blizzard set aside. And as soon as you break those rules, you forfeit all access and all, like, you essentially forfeit your account, because that's when they can ban you, right? And so that whole entire premise is flawed from that sense, where all Blizzard is selling you is a video game as a service, right? Because that's the whole entire transaction. They're hosting the server so you can play the game. And so they can say what you can and cannot do on their servers. And that's kind of where like the RMT really starts to break down the fabric of the game.
Yeah, I think the difficulty here is because if you say buying gold is wrong, I think most people agree on this. It's easy. And this part, you will get most people on your side. But let me ask you a question. Most people have like this boy in the neighborhood who comes around and mows the garden or does some other stuff, and he gets paid for this. Imagine you tell him, okay, here's my computer, farm 3 hours for me, and you give him $5 an hour or whatever. And this would already be something most people would say, oh, okay. Or let's say your own kids earn some money by helping you there. Yeah, they get their weekly thing. Instead of cleaning up in the kitchen, they do this for you. Whatever. But I think this border can be brought to a point where people are not strictly on one side or the other side. And this is the difficulty about this. I mean, I'm agreeing. Classic especially was not made for transactions, real money transactions. But I think the problem is this strict rule being not so strongly forced by Blizzard has weakened a lot, and now there's a lot of gray area in between, and this will even grow in the next expansion.
I do agree with the fact that Blizzard not enforcing the rule has caused this gray area. And I know that there's those conspiracies out there that are like, well, Blizzard's incentivized not to enforce it for X, Y, or Z reason, whether that be, the bots paying more subscriptions or creating a game state where they can then with more acceptance from the community, introduce that RMT through the WoW token into a TBC client or a WoW or even a Wrath client much earlier. So I do agree with you in a lot of ways that like this is one of those things where it's if a rule isn't enforced, then is the rule even valid to have in the first place? And that's kind of like this chicken and egg issue that we run into.
I think, yeah, as we said, like if you had a WoW token, then you would have an even playing field. I think is like what Gargot said. But I think we have an even playing field right now. It's not like it's hard to buy gold or anything. Everyone can do it. And I think there is an even playing field. Everyone can buy gold. It's not hard. But of course, if you are poor, you will not be able to afford buying gold. So that's like the way that the playing field is not even. But that would be the same with the WoW token, I guess.
I guess my counterpoint to that would be the uneven enforcement of the rules has created the problem in this scenario, right? It's like if you buy gold and don't get banned, but if I buy gold and I get banned, then I got punished for an action that you did not get punished for, even though we're taking the same action, right?
Yeah, but right now in my head, I would say no one gets banned. But of course, I don't know that for sure, right? But in my opinion, this is a bit like the war on drugs in many countries, right? You're trying to fight this illegal trade, but you can't really do it, and it's not really being enforced as much as it perhaps should be. And then you see some countries now, from different reasons, of course, but some would also argue that some countries are like giving up on the war on drugs and saying, we can't control this market, so we might as well just make it legal and make some money off of it. And I think that's also like what you could argue could be done with the WoW token. I would not like feel strongly if they introduce a WoW token. I don't really care. I mean, my playing experience is not affected by other people having gold to that big of a degree. Yeah. I understand that in an RPG, the best players should be the ones that are rewarded with the greatest items and not the players which are the richest. But I also don't think the players who put the most time into a game should be the ones with the best gear and the coolest vanity items. I think it should be the best players and not the players who play the most. And I think gold is a thing that you can get with zero skill, but a lot of time dedication.
Yeah. And kind of backtrack just a little bit about your like comparison to the war on drugs. I guess we can look to the Chinese gold farmers that like a lot of North American servers have a lot of issues with. I don't recall exactly where the article was published at, but there was a article that got published that had an interview with a gold farmer who said that the reason that the American servers are so flooded was because China introduced the WoW token, so it was no longer a valid business operation for them to operate there. So they went to the next best market, which is the American market.
Yeah, I wanted to comment about the stance because I see a lot of times that real money trading is bad because it's cheating, basically. And I think that the people who claim this sort of miss the point in the sense that even if you agree, and I personally agree, that you don't own your charter in a game like World of Warcraft because it's a service. I mean, you don't own your charter more than you own your hand of cards when you are playing cards with your friends. I'm not talking about trading card games. I'm talking about normal card games like poker. I don't know, stuff like that. But even if you concede that, you can't really prevent real money from having an impact, however indirect it may be, on the gameplay experience. Think, for example, of the people who are actually paid to play World of Warcraft, or the people who are so rich, so wealthy, that they can put a lot more time into the game than other people. Or even people who can afford to pay other people to play for them and all this kind of stuff. Even without going into problems of ownership, you can't really prevent real money from affecting the gameplay. So yes, to a certain extent, wealthy people, real life wealthy people, we always have an advantage and you can't really remove it. So I wouldn't really call it cheating to some extent. And furthermore, the problem is that, like you see in many other games, there is an inverse relation of proportionality between money and time in the real world, in the sense that normally people who have more money tend to be the people who have less time to play the game, so they are the ones who are in the best position to actually need and have the means to actually buy stuff with real money. But aside from that, I mentioned the stuff about cheating because, as Yolose was saying about, basically replacing time with skill, that's probably, I think, the only way you can actually remove the factor of real money and its impact on the game, because basically money in our world is always tradable with time in one way or the other. But the problem is that if you go down the skill path, you can't really reconcile this with a sort of RPG approach, because the whole premise of an RPG, especially of the kind World of Warcraft is that you can put time into the game and get stuff out of it, so you see your character progress over time. If you turn it into a pure contest of skill, you risk basically getting something, like League of Legends or stuff like that. I can't really imagine maintaining an RPG structure without having time being a crucial factor in your charter progress.
If you kind of have the idea that you need both time and high skill level to kind of get accomplish the high-end feats, then you just kind of start getting games that are like a lot of other MMOs, even retail, for example, right? Like to do mythic difficulty and get the best gear in the game, you can't just put time into the game. You actually have to be pretty damn good at it as well.
Yeah, I think everyone is like making very good points, and I think you said, I think it was in your comments to the thing that you read, to the quote, that Blizzard is not enforcing it like we would like, and I think when you're saying we, I mean, we are talking here, and I think all of us would agree that we would rather play the game without real money trading than with it. And I think 99% of players would say that. But still, you have a huge market. So I think when we are saying we don't want real money trading as a community, I think that's not really true, because obviously there is a huge market for it, right? And I think we are fooling ourselves by saying that only evil people are buying gold. I think almost everyone playing WoW knows someone who bought gold, and if they were truly that evil, why wouldn't we report them to?
Yeah. I know you've hit the nail on the head, mate. That's a very good point to make. I'm not a religious man, but I have the image being conjured up of sinning through the week and then going to church on Sunday and asking for forgiveness. It's, we're kind of all saying that we don't want this, but then so many people are taking part in it. Vivikas, go for it, man.
Yeah, I think 2 points. First of all, I think all of us here have the same meaning about this, but even so, the group is quite thinking the same. For example, I disagree a lot with what Yolo said about gaining gold is easy. Yes, gaining a couple or a little bit of gold, or let's say 5 to 10,000, is most likely easy on many servers. But to actually get to the gold cap, you need quite some skills, because you cannot farm it. You have to find other ways to do it if you don't want to buy money or gold. And this is again exactly the point which makes this game so difficult, because each group of the people have different targets, and they partly contradict each other, because everybody who sees the game as an economy game kind of hurts all the other players who want to do their raiding and want to get as cheaply as possible their raid consumables. Or their raid equipment, and this is an issue which will be there for all of the game, and I believe by this real money transfer or using this is some playstyles have favors with this, are pushed more with this than others. And the only way to stop is to enforce it really strictly. But then I believe more than 50% of the people playing WoW have done some real money transfer in their life. And so there would not be much players left. So in the end, I don't think this is really in the interest of Blizzard. That's why the token came later in the game. to make this possible.
But what would you guys rather have? Would you rather have a token in TBC or just the market that is the black market that is currently in vanilla?
If I cannot enforce a rule, I don't put this rule in the game. I do something else, because the guys, as you said, the guys who can make some money, they can at least play for free. That's at least something they get, and it's not the mean companies earning the money. It's a lot of players who can earn the money.
It would seem that the solution would possibly be the World of Warcraft token, but I think that the problem of that means of solving the solution is that not only that token allows everybody to become a gold buyer, but also allows everybody to become a gold seller, and I think that's the main problem. I mean, the problem of real money trading, I think, is that a lot of people end up not be able to actually buy real money because they can only do so through shady third parties, which might put their credit cards at risk, or they might risk getting banned. And so it's not an opportunity for everyone, so to speak. And the token, yes, it solves this problem, but by allowing everybody not just to buy gold for real world money, but basically to trade gold for real world money, it creates an incentive for gold farming, an incredible incentive that previously didn't exist, because most people I know, for example, in World of Warcraft, even right now in Classic, only farms enough gold to afford their expenses. They don't farm gold ad infinitum, so to speak. But if you put the World of Warcraft token into the equation, then suddenly you have an incentive to farm as much gold as you possibly can, because the more gold you farm, the more real money you get in terms of paying for your subscription. So it ends up increasing the prices to a point where you basically have to play yourself the World of Warcraft token economy, so to speak. So if we could possibly have a World of Warcraft token that you can only buy for real world money, but not for gold, and the price is sort of fixed by Blizzard, that will probably fix the problem without creating the sort of inflation that we see in retail. But I think that the way it was implemented in World of Warcraft created more problems than it solved.
But it would take out, but it would take out the randomness of being enforced. So, as you said exactly, it would give everybody the same chance. And exactly this is what I think is the interesting thing about it. It's everybody having the same chance. People having less money can earn their playtime by doing this. It's an advantage for them. And everybody has the same chance to buy money, to buy gold in the game. Now it's not fair. Now it's not everybody doing the same.
Yeah, so my main point that I was going to bring up was like with the WoW token specifically is everyone always views it as an item that's like, well, now people will just buy a bunch of WoW tokens, get a bunch of gold, and suddenly the market's inflated. But you have to remember that the tokens only move from one player to another. Like it doesn't take gold or add gold to the economy. It just shifts who has the gold. And usually people who are buying the gold are more willing to then spend that gold in the economy itself. So you don't have to do a raw gold farm like Zerator was suggesting. You could actually be a commodity farmer to farm out all of the consumables, all of the materials needed to craft some of these sets, sell those on the auction house to the people who are buying WoW tokens for gold, and then turn around and pay for your game time. Right? It just creates this like really nice flow within the economy that doesn't cause inflation in any like reasonable way.
All right. Guys, we'll get to my third last question. I'm just mindful of the time, as obviously it's creeping up on 3:00 in the morning for some of you guys on this call. And again, I cannot thank you enough for putting your bodies on the line for the show. Thank you so much, everyone. But just a little bit further to go. And as I say, if you do want to go to sleep or anything, please feel free to say so. But I've got a question regarding bots. And again, Gargoyle, this might be in your wheelhouse, but I'm sure everyone will have something to say on this one. And here's a quote from another thesis that I found on the topic. And it's a much shorter one than the last one I read. This won't take long to read. And they said, just as the US government tightly regulates the printing of money, game developers carefully regulate the scarcity of in-game items and currency. In a sense, game developers act as a de facto government over their centrally planned economy. Because a volatile economy where a player assets could be made irrelevant or worthless would discourage people from participating in the game, MMORPG economies follow predictable real-world economic principles. Currencies, both real and virtual, are therefore nearly identical because they have a high exchange value despite having no use value. And that's a quote from a paper. Oh, sorry, this is the same. I forgot to read this before. This is a paper called Understanding Real Money Trading in MMORPGs by Augustus Urschel from 2011. Sorry, I should have said that before. But my question from that quote is this. Keeping that in mind, has the bot situation in Classic and what we will no doubt get in TBC become somewhat tantamount to a real-world printing of one's own money? Has it gotten so problematic that this is basically a why can't I speak English anymore? And I've forgotten the word for a place that prints money. Someone help me out. Anyway, I'll throw it out there.
Treasury?
Yeah, well, Treasury. There you go. Go for it, guys. Who's got something to say on this one?
I mean, I would say that it's sort of intermediate between actually printing money and having the money produced by the central bank, because what developers do is not exactly as tightly regulated as how real money enters the real world market, because to make it as simple as possible for people who are listening, but when, for example, the European Central Bank or the Federal Reserve wants money to enter the market, they basically lend this money to the most important banks, who then lend it to to consumers, basically, in the end. And that's why they use the so-called cost of money, the interest rates, in order to make this money enter the market. This basically means that it's only the central bank who decides how much money there is in the market. Once they set a certain interest rate, no kind of behavior from consumers can alter how much money is in the market. They can alter, for example, inflation. They can alter other aspects, but they cannot alter how much money is in the market. However, developers can only fix, for example, drop rates. So how much money enters the market also depends on how hardcore the player base is, for example, which was a big problem for Classic, because certain rates were fought for a player base from 15 years ago, which was very different from the current player base. But at the same time, I wouldn't say it's the equivalent of printing money, because of course there are certain caps because of drop rates and so on. So yes, people's behavior can alter even out of the hands of developers how much money is in the market, but developers have certain means of controlling this growth of money from becoming completely arbitrary. The only problem is that Classic, as we know, is treated as a museum piece. So developers are very wary of actually taking action. Probably if this happened 15 years ago, developers would have been a lot more hands-on on controlling the drop rates and so on in order to prevent things from degenerating like they have.
Yes, I think the developers are the treasury, and it's very easy even for the real treasury to print money. Today, especially, there's no gold behind it anymore since many, many years. So the currency is worth only the symbolic worth of the country, and the same is for the game. So the game designers print money by giving you gold through via quest or or raw gold or vendor items. And the bots actually influence this if they are the bots, for example, the thieves or the rogues in black how is it called in English?
BlackRock Depths.
BlackRock Depths. Yes, exactly. They actually accelerate the inflation and they print money because they only go for raw gold. The ones in Stratholm, much less. So I think this is exactly yes, the bots can influence this system a lot by doing stuff like in BlackRock Devs. And they take over the ability of the developers to regulate this market. Usually they're regulated by bringing in fees. And this is something which helps to take it out again. But the bots, again, they don't consume it. They just produce it. And this is the problem.
And sorry, by the way, mint was the word I was looking for before. I completely went blank. Thank you so much, Bubba Share Show, for reminding me about that English word that I couldn't fetch from the depths of my memory. Now, Gargoyle, so did you have anything to wind up on this one?
Well, originally I was going to kind of bring up a point, but Zerator really kind of hit the nail on the head already, where it's like in a traditional MMO, I would agree that the developer can influence like the amount of money that's in the economy, but because Classic is really a no change concept, it's just a museum piece, then we have this problem where we do have the very real potential of runaway inflation because of things like the BlackRock Depth farm, the raw gold farms out of all the Mara boosts and all the SM boosts, and originally the ZF zombie farm was another big one. So we do have some problems that might need to be addressed sometime in the future or in future expansions by Blizzard. But we're also not a traditional MMO in the way that paper was kind of based upon.
Yeah, just one little, let's call it provocation, that a game economy will always be a lot more unstable and broken than a real world economy, for the simple fact that there are certain financial instruments in the real world, for example, derivatives and other ways of expressing your expectations about prices in the future, that in the real world allows markets to stabilize more quickly because people, financial operators can perceive what people expect from a certain commodity in terms of will it rise in price, how much it will rise in price, and so they can take actions which sort of counterbalance this kind of movements.
This can also destabilize it a lot. So I think the argument is theoretically right, but in the reality is if everybody bets on the same side, just with the different instruments, it's even a much stronger going out of the system.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact is that, of course, if they are not regulated correctly and so on, they can have the opposite effect, as we have seen the 2012 crisis of sovereign debt and so on. But the thing is, in a healthy economy where these instruments are used for what they should be used, they actually generally stabilize the market a bit in the long run. The thing is that, of course, we have nothing of this in World of Warcraft. We have no kind of regulations as we see in stock markets. And so the market will always be a bit more wild than what we are used to. So, no, I mean, I say this only just to clarify that when people, for example, compare inflation in the game to inflation in real life and other aspects of World of Warcraft economy to real life economy, you must always keep in mind that the economy in World of Warcraft and games in general will always be a bit more savage, so to speak, than real world. That's all I want.
Zerator, if I can jump in, I'm going to help you out here because I've got a quote of yours teed up and ready to go. I'll let you nod along and say, fuck, I'm right, because you said this once. We need to distinguish between inflating prices, i.e. prices that quickly grow over time, and high but stable prices. The latter is an issue because it quickly devalues people's liquid assets, forcing them to constantly reinvest in order not to see their farming effort eroded. High but stable prices, on the other hand, don't really have the same negative impact. It just means that raw gold farming is a lot more inefficient than resource farming. And the reason I brought that up is you seem to be saying now that people do get quite confused about what is an inflated price in WoW.
Yes, I mean, a lot of people when talk about inflation in World of Warcraft don't really seem to understand, at least that's what they get when they discuss the problem. what inflation is and why it is a problem. Inflation is not having high prices. Inflation is, on the one hand, having prices which increase over time, and on the other hand, having prices which increase in an unpredictable way over time.
Hold that thought 1 second, Zoraida, because I'll help you with a intense definition of inflation to build on that I found at Creating Virtual Economies, The Ultimate Guide by Sean Ray, 2018. Inflation is the rate at which the prices for goods and services is rising, and therefore the purchasing power or intrinsic value of a currency is falling. Inflation happens when the money supply grows faster than the rate of economic growth. Main causes of inflation are demand growing faster than supply and price rises due to higher costs of production or raw materials. Most economists today favor a low and steady rate of inflation. A high inflation rate is regarded as harmful to an economy because it adds inefficiencies to the market, makes it difficult to budget or plan long-term, and uncertainty about the future purchasing power of money discourages investment and saving. Sorry, I just had to jump in there.
Yeah, it's also worth adding on this that, but this is a bit of a sort of technicality. The inflation is not simply the increase in price. So if you see a commodity that costed like 1,000 gold one day and 2,000 gold after a certain amount of time, doesn't necessarily mean that that increase is only inflation. To a certain extent, the increase in prices is the result of an actual development of the economy. It's the result of an increase in production and what we can do with our time, so to speak. It's the difference between this actual real increase and the nominal increase, which is what you actually see. The nominal is the actual price that you see in front of your screen. That is actually the inflation, which is why, for example, in real life, we distinguish between nominal GDP and real GDP, and the difference between the growth rates of these two are what we call inflation in macroeconomics. I don't know if one of the other people who study macroeconomics can support me on this, but yeah.
Yeah, I think one issue is also inflation is usually took or over a portfolio of products. And in this case here, we always talk about the few items which a few people need a lot. And these items have a high change in the prices depending on demand. But if you look over all the products, all the items you can get in World of Warcraft, I think the inflation would not be so high as we imagine it. It's just there are some parts which are in high demand and it fluctuates, like nature pots. When AQ came out, there was a high price increase. Now it's still there, but not so much. And before there, in phase one, there was nearly no increase in pricing there, but for other items. So if you would do like a complete set of items you need over all the phases and then look into these phases, what happens, I think the overall increase would not be so extremely high as we imagine it, because we only see the parts or the items we need now, and we see they are now on a higher price level.
I think the term you mean here is basket of goods, which is...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think this like kind of ties into the thing that you talked about earlier. Is the economy even broken? Does it need fixing, right? And I think, like we've talked about now, many people mistakenly think, okay, the prices are high. This is because of inflation and it's going to ruin the economy because I've read somewhere that inflation is bad, right? But as you also said,
yes.
Some inflation, all economists almost, they agree that inflation is not a bad thing. High inflation is a bad thing, but a low and steady inflation is not a bad thing per se. It's better than many of the other alternatives. So I think we have to remember, and I think that's my stance on this, is that I don't really think it's a problem in the current state of Classic, the inflation, and I don't think it will be a problem either.
All right, guys, look, thank you. That was brilliant. I loved watching all those economic degrees flying at each other, masters of their craft going back and forth. I have no idea what you were saying, but I'll work it out on the second or third listen. But Guys, you're killing it. Thank you so much. Look, here's the second last question I wanted to ask you. It might be relatively quick, or, feel free to go as nuts as you want to go. I just want to ask you what your preference is, because I brought up those three options at the top of the call, and I said progression without a gold cap, progression with a gold cap, or a fresh economy or server reset or economic reset. Tell me now, we'll go down the line. Gargoyle, I'll start with you, then Vivicus, then Zoraida, then YOLO. And by the way, sorry, everyone, Naismith had to take off about half an hour ago. That's why you haven't heard from him. Tell me what your preference is and why. Gargoyle, go for it.
If I was being purely selfish, my personal preference would be a pure fresh server, but that's not because of an economic reason, but because I kind of like the big camaraderie that the server has as everyone's leveling up. But given that aside, I would say that I think the best thing for WoW Classic is going to be just straight progression.
Yeah,
straight progression, no gold cap. You mean, right?
No gold cap, nothing. Just like it was in vanilla to TBC originally, just straight progression.
Yeah, I would also take the straight progression, but I would like to see them adding some fresh servers for the people who like this, so they can hit 2 flies with 1 hit, I guess. I think that's possible and would be the best choice for everybody. The gold cap, I see no. I mean, if you do something like a gold cap, then you need to do a gold cap, an alt cap, an account cap. You have to look at everything later on, what is trading between different accounts. You would have had a lot of forces to enforce this, and I don't think Blizzard has this.
Too easy. And you've just reminded me of the segue I want to jump into real quick after this as well. Zoraida, go for it. What's your preference?
Well, as I said before, I don't know if I will be better off in a situation with normal progression, gold cap, or a fresh experience. But if I were to give a preference, I will probably choose normal progression, because if we went for a fresh experience or even a gold cap to a lesser extent, we will create an expectation in the player base that Wrath of the Lich King 2 will follow the same fate, and this could have a very negative impact on the progression plateau phase.
Very good point, mate. I hadn't even thought that far down the road. That you fucking nailed it. That's excellent to bring up. YOLO, go for it.
Yeah, I would I think I would have the most fun if everyone had 0 gold, but I think that is an unrealistic idea unless you talk about a 100% fresh server. I don't think you can allow people to transfer and then impose functioning gold caps. Unfortunately, I would love to bring my one level 60, no alts, no other accounts, no items that could vendor for anything, and no gold in my mailbox or anything. But I think it will be too hard to enforce for Blizzard, and I think that's why I think it would be a ruined experience, because some people will find loopholes. So I think pure progression with no gold cap will be my preferred way to go. Also, I feel like people would, of course, want their characters to progress. And I think we have to remember that one of the things that the community loves the most is prepping for the future. I mean, in phase 1, people were prepping for phase 3, 4, 5, and 6 even, right? I have a mate who had 600 elemental earths in phase 1 because he knew that they were going to be worth a lot when next came out, right? So people love prepping, and I think if we send them the signal that every new expansion will be a fresh server, then they will stop prepping. And also, I mean, if they were to really announce TBC a week from now and they would say it's going to be on a fresh server, or it's going to be without your gear and anything, you will have your character and vanity items, but it will be naked and with nothing in the bank slots, then why would people want to keep on playing? I mean, then they would say, okay, why am I spending 500 gold each week raiding next when I am not going to get any benefit from it, right? So I think in order to cater to this prepping culture, I think for Blizzard to allow everything would be the most viable option for them as well.
All right, too easy. Now, guys, real quick, just while I think of it, I promise we're almost done. Do you expect Blizzard to change anything whatsoever in the way that they tackle RMT or bots in the TBC? My really quick answer is no, not at all. What about you guys?
I agree. No, they don't do anything.
Yeah, I can't imagine any kind of item that could create the same kind of issues that Black Lotus did. And I think that was the only thing that Blizzard really changed. And then Devil Sword, but yeah, same boat, basically.
I wouldn't be surprised if they added a way to buy gold through their own website. Like
The WoW token.
I would not be surprised. I would not bet on it, but I wouldn't be surprised either.
Yeah, I was going to say either they're going to do nothing or token.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. All right, guys, look, last question for you is this one. It's funny because we've just talked almost 3 hours about the economy in TBC, and I'm sure a lot of people came here thinking, rubbing their hands together going, fuck yes, here we go. All these gurus are going to tell me how to make boatloads of cash in TBC, and we haven't touched on that at all because this hasn't really been a tips and tricks podcast. This has been more the nuts and bolts of how virtual economies work and what we come to expect in TBC. But for shits and giggles, guys, if people did need a quick helping hand, just a bit of discussion amongst yourselves. Are there items that you would say people, we talk about the big ones like, the primals and everything, but outside of the box, are there any items that, whether or not you're comfortable in talking about them and sharing secrets, that you've kind of circled or highlighted and gone, I think there could be a market for this in TBC?
In the beginning, it will be everything where you can get reputation. This is something I would always go for because it's steady gold and it's for sure you get some. You can farm them in instances, easy to do. And the rest, I think everything you need for crafting will be in the beginning just skyrocketing. Not only the primals, but also all the other parts you need there.
I think especially the rep ones is like, it's not a niche because a lot of people know about it and a lot of people will farm it. But the Eldor and the Scryer rep items will be a possible, very good, a golden goose, you could even say, I think. But not for the entirety, but in the beginning, if you're looking to make a lot of gold in the beginning. But otherwise, I would say patience. Being able to wait a couple of weeks more on your own craftable items and then selling your cooldowns will probably be a great way to make some gold in the beginning. And then, of course, investing like you could do in vanilla as well. I think in the beginning, people will not use that many gems, and they will use some specific ones, which will evolve later on. For instance, I'm playing Warlock. I will not use the same gems when I'm raiding Tier 4 compared to Tier 5. So I will be swapping all of them out almost. And that will create a huge demand. So with each new tier, there will be huge demand for enchanting mats, and there will be huge demand for new gems. So you could buy that and hope to see the price increase. And also in the beginning, there will be more people doing dungeons, which will mean that more blues will drop and more blues will get disenchanted. So there should be more enchanting mats in the market early on compared to later on, when people only are raid logging and not really doing dungeons. But of course, if we have 1,000 bots in every dungeon, then that point really doesn't matter.
I'm going to take a bit of a different take on it. So I think the things that you might see as like surprise items that come back from Classic are a couple of different potions and flasks. Flask of Petrification as kind of a cheese item right now is still a thing in TBC. It doesn't get broken until Wrath of the Lich King with Algalon. Free action potion, living action potions as well are still usable. So you might see some of those, like they might not be, it depends on your server. It depends on if you have like a speed running scene on your server and if the speed running scene even stays around for TBC. But if they are around, those are things that I would not be surprised to see come back to the forefront for those speedrunning guilds.
I wanted to say two things. The first one is your cooldowns are worth their weight in gold early on. So if you're preparing for TBC, get as many alts with alchemy and tailoring cooldowns, because those are things that people can't really compete you on, and you will make a lot of gold out of those, probably a lot more than they cost leveling up right now. And the second thing is in TBC, even more than in Classic, and especially early on when prices are not stabilized yet, be ready to diversify your portfolio, so to speak, and to buy as many different things as possible, because there is a lot of stuff in TBC that is a lot more useful than in Classic. Maybe we mentioned it before, leather. In Classic, rugged leather was basically pointless because it's used only for a few crafts. In TBC, knot-tied leather is used for drums, and a lot of people will level up leather working a lot more than Classic. Even fish will be a lot more used, because in Classic, most people didn't really use food, and even those few who used food mostly used food which didn't necessarily come from fishing, whereas in TBC almost all the good food comes from fishing, and food becomes a lot better. It lasts 30 minutes and gives much better stats. So there are a lot of different things that are useful in Classic, so in TBC. So don't waste your time trying to fight over that one single spawn. Always be on the move. Always watch the auction house, and always try to get the best out of your time, especially early on, because it will be as chaotic as possible. Don't be afraid of going to instance and so on.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing. There are a lot of videos already there which show you what you could farm already in Classic. But I think everything you see there, everybody else sees. So in the end, it could be more interesting to just bring as much gold into the expansion and then buy at this point when you see what's going on actually. Because I believe so many people have stacked ores and bars and gems because everybody thinks they will do this. And yeah, that's right. But I think the guys who want to, I want to do a jewel crafting guy. I want to play a paladin on Horde, so I will put him up there. And I already have everything I need, even more than I need. So I will use all of this, get to the point, and then sell the rest. I will buy nothing. And this is, I think most of the people will have this effect because you have so much time now to prepare. We have at least 4 or 5 months until TBC comes. And this is what you can do. So the preparation will be done by most people. So I'm not so sure if you will earn so much money with the leather and the bars than the people think. So I would watch these videos, and everything they say, I would believe everybody knows. So I would do something else.
Very good advice, mate. Very good. All right, guys. Well, look, I really should put you out of your misery. It is 3:20 a.m. where you are in the world. I cannot thank you enough for doing what you've done for this show. It has been an absolutely enthralling conversation. And like I said, I really do look forward to listening back through this again myself to really digest the points that you guys have hit on over the last almost 3 hours. So I'll bid you farewell and let you say your goodbyes, but I'll start with the Europeans. And I'll say one more thing actually for everyone listening. It is absolutely, I've said this before on stream, it's astonishing to me the level of intelligence that these guys show, also to be able to discuss some pretty intense topics in, something that is not their native language. English is a second language for many of these European guests, and they come on and just smash it. Really, really high profile chat here, and it was just amazing. And I thank you all so much. So let me just say, Vivikas, mate, it was so nice meeting you. We'll have to do something again like this sometime soon.
Yes, I liked it very much. Thank you to the others. It was a really, really interesting discussion. I wouldn't have stayed up until now if it would have not been. And anytime I can bring something to the table, feel free to let me know.
Thank you so much, mate. And Zareta, as always, you were fantastic. Thanks for staying up for us.
Thank you, Josh, for the opportunity. It was really enjoyable, and I think that Wille put it in even better terms than I could right now. So yeah, I look forward to the next podcast that we participate in.
Thanks so much, mate. We'll definitely get you back. YOLO, it was so good to have you back again. You're so passionate, and I love hearing from you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love talking about this, and I actually think one of the guys today said that they don't really think that they can influence anything. And I would actually say the reason why I reached out to guys like you, for instance, and tried to get out and make my voice heard is actually because I think that perhaps I have a naive idea, at least, that I can change this game for the better. And TBC is my favorite game by far, and I would do anything I can to make it a success. So this is why I'm so passionate. And I actually think that if the community stands together and voice their opinion, we will be heard. And we saw that in Vanilla as well. I think that some of the points were actually brought all the way up to Blizzard, and they changed their direction on some stuff because of the community.
I appreciate that, mate, and I completely know where you're coming from, even though I wouldn't go as far as saying the podcast has any sway in anything that happens with World of Warcraft Classic. All I can say is that I know that Blizzard listens to it. So for whatever that's worth to people, you're absolutely right. It's not just shouting into the nether. It's players voicing their concerns, and at least they're being heard. So what they do with it from there is up to them.
Yeah, but also just, spreading the word amongst the community. As you're saying, it's not that they are listening and doing everything that we're saying, but if I can influence 10 people to feel the same way that I do, and I think that's the right way, of course, then that would be great, in my opinion.
Yeah, I didn't want to sound too pessimistic when I talked about not being able to influence. I just meant to say that I don't expect to influence Blizzard directly, but if we can even only improve the experience of other gamers by telling them what they need to know for the expansion to come, I think that we're already doing a lot of good.
Now I want to try and get one of the devs to tweet out, holy shit, did you hear what Zoraida said the other day on Countdown to Classic? We'll try and get that happening. Finally, yeah, we can hope. I know it's not as late where you are in the world, mate, but I still appreciate it nonetheless. Obviously putting in so many hours for the show and putting in the hard yards. Gargoyle, it's been really nice having you back, man.
Thank you for having me on again. It's always enjoyable to come on and just, talk about this amazing game that we all love. And much like the other guys, I just want to do my part to try and give a little bit back to the community, whether that be, specific class information or my take on the economy from a different perspective, just so we can all maybe have a little bit more of a focus going forward, or maybe make a positive change through a community effort for whatever happens come possible TBC, since we still don't have a confirmation.
Well said, mate. Well said. And as I said, Naismith had to take off about 45 minutes ago, but big thank you to him. I know he'll be back on the show as well. So we appreciate what he put into this episode. Absolutely. And I'm sure all of you will be back in the near future. I think Gargoyle, you're coming back for the Mage episode, I believe. Zoraida, you'll be back for the Paladin episode. YOLO and Vivikas, I'll talk to you guys about what we can get you on. But yeah, we'll talk to you later, guys. Thanks so much for that.